everybody just sit up here, that way everybody kind of looking at each other, or greater distance between, or we come over there, or?
Oh, man.
We could all go over there.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
Oh, cut him off.
Yeah, that's fine, too, yeah. What ones seem to be easiest, less formal.
We need the microphones.
Okay.
The recording, you have to talk into it. It's the same as the commission meeting as far as the technology and the minutes and saving the files.
Is
and
this
all the
it?
documents and everything I need to see.
Okay, well, this is making me nervous, so, should we all gather around the same table, or is it that
This
big?
could be, this is fine.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Everybody's comfortable where they're sitting.
Yeah, apparently.
If you wanna sit down there, you could feel more comfortable down there.
I'll be all right.
All right, well, I guess this is it. We'll call the meeting to order. First meeting for 2019 of the Finance Committee So we have no public comment,
No, sir.
no approval items, and what we have is discussion. So we have a number of items to discuss. We could do these in any order. I guess first, Don has an item he wants to add to the agenda. Do we have to do a motion and all that sort of thing to add
I don't
something
know
to the
well, I'm-
agenda?
No.
It depends on how formal or informal you want it to be. If you want to go formal, then yes, sir, but if you want to just keep it informal, as long as you're in agreement.
Well, if you want to make a motion to add the tap fees, we can do that.
I move to add a short discussion on tap fees.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Okay. And we'll do that first.
Item 10, tap fees.
Everyone do that last? Okay.
First
Well, we can
or
do it
last? I don't
whenever.
care.
What?
So, Chairman,
Well, I think the tap fees probably
first,
roll
want to
into
do
the
tap
finance.
fees
so
first?
my
Wait,
here.
let's just add it on as 10.
Okay,
Okay, that's good.
all right.
Our first item is KPI scorecard.
We, Mr. Chairman, basically what we did was, and I don't know if you recall, when we talked about the strategic business plan, we went through, and I don't have a copy, I can get you a copy, but we had 20 initiatives in that strategic business plan. For each one, staff sat through and tried to work up specifics to measure the impact of those initiatives. We are still finalizing the set. We've got the list, but as we went through to refine the list and, set out the assignments and those kind of things, this 13-page, it turns out a lot of the KPIs weren't organization-wide. If we wanted to know the efficiencies of overtime in a particular, it doesn't work, because the things that impact maybe the wastewater treatment folks doesn't impact, it's a different situation for the folks that do the collection lines, from the water production, from the, anyway, it turned out where we had one item, it multiplied to 5 or 6 on many of the KPIs that we put together. We're setting up strategic meetings to go through and cull this list down to meaningful KPIs. Maybe we don't need to do it for every division. Maybe we need to do it just for some to get an idea of which ones are more affected by the initiatives than the others. But we're setting up meetings, and I've got a copy of the KPI list as it sits today, which, as you can see, and that's 13 pages.
13 pages of KPIs.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah, that's a little more than what I was thinking about.
But that came, as we were working through the strategic business plan, we basically, it made sense as we were putting up the KPIs for the various initiatives. We didn't stop to work out the details of, how is it going to be applied to every single division? How are we going to consolidate the numbers? Those kind of things. And yours truly, as I sat down and started to get ready to make assignments and get it out, I started working through it and realized this is not straightforward as we imagined when we were working through the strategic business plan. So we're gonna have, and we're starting to set up scheduled meetings to work through this. I mean, you're welcome to take the version we've got right now, which, by the way, what I've done, I wanted to set it up for dashboard purposes. Who needs which of these? There's the senior staff, the mid-level staff, and the commissioners.
I think that's good.
So all you guys gotta do, when I finalize this list, X by the spot marks the ones you want on your dashboard. And we'll create a dashboard in OpenGov, John will, and we'll make sure if, the ones that you mark are the ones that you get. If you want different KPIs, if there's information you want different from the ones we have listed, more than welcome to, we'll gladly add them. And we'll just put it in as a row and add those things to it. But that's where we're at on the KPIs. Would you like this?
I would like that, if I can have that copy.
I'll send you a digital if that'll be helpful.
Thank you. Do y'all want copies of the KPIs?
I think if he's gonna send it digitally, then.
Yeah, send it
I'll send
digitally.
it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, what I was interested in was to find out what the status was of KPIs.
That's
And
the
I see the
status.
status. I like the idea that you're planning to have,
Dashboards.
yeah, dashboards where we can decide who wants to see what, as well as who needs to see it, even if they don't want to see it. It'll be out there to be seen.
And certainly, I don't want to share everything we've got there with everybody in the public. That would just be, but there's probably some that are pertinent to level of service that the public might be interested in.
Well, I think the commissioners, you have KPIs you need and you want to manage your business.
Right.
And then the commissioners will have some feelings about what we want to see. And they should be a higher level. That's what I'm anticipating. We're going to want to see a higher level set of KPIs.
If they're not already in there,
So it's a
we'll
good
add 'em.
start.
Okay.
And this is great. And ultimately, this is going to be online?
No, sir. What I intended is for each of you to have access to OpenGov, and we can set up, Mr. Donahue will set up dashboards based on what everybody marks. I don't want to just leave everything we've got out there for folks that aren't on the inside to analyze and try to pick apart. I want things that'll be meaningful, that you don't have to have an inside knowledge of what's going on to make sense of it. We could get into chasing a lot of rabbits if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think first, the ideal of KPIs is to have a way to report what's happening, essentially. And then after we know what the numbers are, if we can find a way to, we'll choose which ones are interesting and important. And if we can find a way to identify what typical KPIs would be in the marketplace,
And
then we can use them to manage the business.
well, to that end, I actually, in looking at the AWWA, American Water Works Association, and WEF, Water Environment Federation, they're the water, wastewater side of things out in our industry. They're the big trade organizations. And they're the ones that kind of did a lot of that work on attributes of effective utility management. In addition, because larger utilities were involved in it, they set up the KPIs they already used. Now, these are big utilities, but they are examples of what other utilities used, and they put it out there for all of us little guys to be able to take advantage of and maybe not have to reinvent the wheel in some cases. But we have some industry-wide, I won't say norms, but some good examples from some of the bigger utilities in the industry that I can shoot you also also a digital copy of that for comparison.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you. So that's a digital copy. Of the AWWA industry norm KPIs.
Or industry provided. I won't say they're absolute norms, but, you know, each of the big boys that participated in the development of the attributes submitted their KPIs to the overall list.
So this list of KPIs that you just gave me a hard copy of, this starting point, you're going to provide a digital copy, email it to the three of us?
Along with the other. I'm gonna have to divide it up. There may be big files.
To the Finance Committee. So I'm kind of making an action item list here, so we know what we've all agreed to do. And that's Jimmy, at two
Mhm.
items.
Yes.
Any more on KPIs? Do y'all have any input about KPIs or preferences?
I don't right now. I just want to look at them.
I mean, I agree with the 13 pages being way too much. I think, you know, I'd rather get a few things done perfectly than a lot of things done.
Yeah, those are really down in the weeds. Staff needs, there may be some that are high level, but then they still may not reach all the needs that the commission has for oversight.
I'm envisioning a scorecard, one page, hopefully one page, and it would have certain key KPIs on there that the commissioners want to see. And then we can
You
look
want me to
at
take a
them.
shot at putting together the first?
Just,
That would be great. If you're at a point now that you can select a
Well, I mean-
scorecard, cobble one up, a scorecard.
Let me see what I can cobble up.
So we'll have a sample scorecard, and that's just for the Finance Committee right now.
Right.
Okay, then. We can go on to the next item, line item for disaster preparedness.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to the staff. You know, we've been through two disasters in the last 3 years and almost a third. And we got a little bit of weather from it, but not really anything to note. Most of the standby things that we need, we've accumulated over the course of those 2 years, 3 years. In terms of preparedness, as we talked about it, there's not an annual ongoing need for cash in a line item account because disasters, as we all know, you can't plan for them. You don't know when you're going to have a hurricane, when you're not. We do have contingency in our budget. My rationale and thinking was, since we've got most of the, you know, standby stuff, the cots, the blankets, flashlights, those kind of things that, you know, we would normally need for standby. And we're working on the big picture items, the backup generators, switch gear, and that kind of thing through FEMA grants. We're really not in a situation where allocating funds to a line item that may not get attention. It all depends on the weather. I'm not certain there'd be a benefit in adding one.
I tend to agree with that also, kind of thinking, you know, that kind of thing would be, you know, that's what reserves are for.
Yeah.
An operating reserve,
Agree.
you're not, you know, you're not.
Is this item on here in response to
I don't know why it's on there.
the one that I suggested? It must be. If you didn't put it on here, then it's the one that I put on
Yeah,
here.
it was.
And that's, yeah, that's not what I was after with this line item.
What were you thinking?
What I was looking for on the agenda item was, we received back reimbursed in January, something in the neighborhood of $465,000, I believe, of funds that came from
FEMA,
two years ago.
yeah, okay.
2 years ago. And we spent those monies 2 years ago. And so that budget was closed out. We had not budgeted for disaster. We had certain impacts, and then FEMA determined that 465,000 of what we turned in were justifiable to be reimbursed. So we got those back. And so what I was curious about was where do those monies, where did they go now in 2018, budget FY 2019? Where did those funds end up? They ended up in the bank someplace.
As far as financial reporting goes, those funds were coded to a revenue account as cash coming in, which is part of the excess that's being generated, the year-to-date revenues over expenditures. That amount is included in that number.
So there's a line item,
It's included in another line item of other income.
So
other income. Go ahead.
What is our, what are we in excess of our revenues over expenses?
As of December 31st, or January 31st, in actual terms, $2.9 million.
Of excess over expenses?
Okay, so essentially, that $400,000 is part of that number. Okay, so the question that I'm curious about is, we have certain budgetary goals, profit goals each year. And doesn't that kind of skew that?
It does skew that, yes.
And I think that's kind of a problem, but I understand we got to account for it. While I'm got the floor, do you establish a particular accounting code to capture what people say are disaster-related expenses that they have to pay for?
We previously had one line item in the budget for that. What LaDonna and I were just discussing is, rather than having a specific line item within the budget, is that we set up a separate division code, much like admin or finance or any of the other operating divisions. Not necessarily the budget for that, but if a disaster does occur, the expenditures.
Yeah, that's important.
Disaster could be coded to those general ledger accounts and separated from the other operating expenditures.
Well, I think that's what you ought to do, and then when you get reimbursement, it ought to reduce those expenses.
If they're in the same year.
Well, yeah,
If they're from 2 years ago,
there should be a way.
In a very technical sense, what, in $400,000 reimbursement is not necessarily material to the financial statements as a whole, given it's a $33 million budget. The numbers are relatively small in total, but technically, to be correct, we should go back and restate the prior year's revenue statements. But that gets to be a very complicated accounting issue.
is there a GL number that,
We could break that out into
that,
separate.
that it landed into here?
I'm not sure exactly which one it was.
Could that not just be carried as future reserve for future storms?
Yeah.
I mean, at some point.
That's what I'm wondering, is there
I
a
would
way
think-
to
Bank,
reserve it?
draw some interest, and then every year, we don't have to budget for
Right.
a storm.
You just use
We
it.
have some reserves set aside if we have a storm.
Yeah.
Included in a damage reimbursement revenue line item.
Well, I don't know why you were looking, whether you heard the discussion that went on up here. Is it possible to establish that as a reserve, disaster reserve?
Would put that
Then we can put the revenue in there.
as another reserve.
Put it in there, let it draw 15, 20% interest, and, I'm just kidding. Let it draw some interest, and,
The only thing that bothers me, and it may be too much effort to do it, you still wind up overstating your expenses for a given calendar year, or fiscal year, excuse me. And FEMA takes its time to do what it does, so you're always gonna have kind of an offset.
You know, this has actually run 3 years now, because the first event was back in 2016.
16.
Then we got reimbursement in 17, and then another event happened in that
Yeah,
year.
but the thing is, if you put it into a reserve, the initial expenses on another disaster can be charged against that.
That's a possibility, have it be its own reserve.
Can I,
To separate those cash receipts, I'm not gonna call them income, but the cash receipts that are received for recovery against the expenditures that were actually incurred during that incident would.
Well, I think what I'm saying is initially, that would be where new expenses
Would be charged against.
would be charged against. Uh-huh,
That's relatively easily done.
yeah.
what are our operating reserves to meet our bond coverage?
It's 4 months of operating expenditures.
Let me suggest something, that we've got that big chunk of change in there to cover for our debt coverage ratio for the bonds, right?
No, that's something different. The operating reserve is something that we include in the bond indenture to give the bondholders some relative security.
But we got a piece of money, a chunk of money that we're holding to make sure that they're happy that we got reserves in case something goes wrong. There's a reserve there, that we're not gonna burn through it unless the world's coming to an end.
So,
Rather
I
than
know where you're going, but can you use that for this? If it,
Yeah, what I was gonna say, free this money up for investment in whatever else, the 15% return. In the meantime, we've got cash sitting on the sidelines for this, and almost at any given time, our R&R reserve has undesignated funds that you all can, with a stroke of a motion, get access to for an event like that. And when a disaster comes, you don't know if it's gonna be $200,000 worth of damages or 6 million. You know, if we're taking a direct Category 4 hit from one of those hurricanes, our whole discussion here would not be about 400,000, it might be about 4 million. So I'm just saying, rather than complicate life and starting another reserve, we know we got funds out there that we can reach into, and this just needs to go into those reserves at the end of the audit.
Yeah, conceptually, I tend to agree with you about reserves. I think we would, it would be a good exercise for the Finance Committee to understand the reserves and decide what is really necessary, what we really need out there as reserves, and then figure out how to utilize them.
I'm just thinking it'd be
It-
less
is that-
complicated.
Is that on the first page of the detailed revenue and expense report? I mean, is that showing up in an operating revenue GL?
The cash that came in,
Yes.
yes, that was in a damage reimbursement. Which one?
Down in line item 344,270?
Yes, line 40 is that report, that 442 is included in that.
I'm sorry,
The, there are line numbers next on the far.
oh, the one I'm looking at just ends in fiscal year 12/31. That's the reason it's not showing up there. So is it on the sheet that,
It's on the 20 page.
Yeah, what's the line item number again?
It's line number 40 of that report,
40, damage reimbursements.
damage reimbursement.
Okay, I
right
got it.
there it is, got it.
And as far as the operating reserve goes, the board or the commission targeted, the target funding level for that is 4 months of operating expenditures. That's
written in stone.
If it's slightly more than that, that's fine. If it's slightly less than that, we should look for supplementary funding in the fiscal year to make up what was withdrawn in prior years. That's simply a target. It's not a hard and fast.
Okay, so if we have a big storm and it costs a lot of money and we
You could-
spend out of that, I mean,
You could utilize that to cover the unexpected, unbudgeted expenditures due to a storm, but then if, to the extent that it falls below the targeted 4-month operating expenditures, we would need to plan to replenish that money in the months.
which would be what we get in reimbursement, and then whatever thing we have to do with the rates to do it.
Combination of those.
Okay, let me ask you this, is it too much to ask that you write up a procedures that the, finance committee can look at and codify this, how we're gonna do it? You agree with that?
On the disaster
Yeah.
damage reimbursements?
Well, on the whole process of how we're going to expense, disaster.
Where would the money come from to
Yeah,
begin
where it's
with?
gonna come from to initially take care of stuff that is not in our operating budget. And then,
From a
Get the river.
financial perspective, I think we need that. There's a disaster preparedness committee now. You may be the chair on that one, aren't you?
no, I don't think so.
I think it's a trip.
Maybe
Yeah.
Tripp is. That's really
Well, I think that,
something that, you know, they put their hands into, and then
Well-
we decide how to pay for it.
yeah, the thing that I think that they would do is look at what do we have in equipment or capital items primarily for disaster preparedness that we need to get, and how are we gonna pay for that would then come to us.
So we don't have any kind of a procedure now on
Well, they.
how to expense disaster preparedness? Or disaster, not preparedness,
paying
but
for the
actual
generators?
disasters?
We've added some line items over the last 2 or 3 years to recover that, but we don't really have a formal procedure. I don't think there's much part of that.
Well, you know, with what people say they want, and I'm not talking about internal to this organization and commission, but what people say they wanna be back on the island if that gets hit in, 4 hours after the storm passes, and want us to have all these generators, there's a,
There's a financial
there's a huge financial thing, not only if you buy that equipment, but to maintain that equipment so that it's in a ready status
Oh, yeah.
is also
That's huge.
a huge thing. And so,
And that's why we would propose setting up a separate division to track those costs, because we have personnel costs, we have food to feed those people, we have all of the fuel and all of the other
He's-
expenditures go along with
He's,
that.
I think, John, he's talking about that, not just the, purchase of a new item, which is more a capital than an operating. The long term of it, probably the long term of maintaining those disaster preparedness, capital items, there's probably 5 to 10% of the, purchase cost that we'll be expending every year on resources.
There's an ownership cost to having all of those generators sitting there.
And I don't know how we could pull that out of, Kirk's people. How many hours a day did John and his guys spend going out there PMing generators, or, you know what I mean? Test running them.
Works any work orders for that generator would be tracked, our cost to Caterpillar would be tracked. There are some direct costs that could be tracked to them.
Oh, I realize that, and any and all expenses we incur, we could probably get to. How much work is it worth just to be able to pull that out? And the added expense to do it is just,
What I wanted to do with this item was just to make sure that the 400, I don't know what it is, it's $482,761, is that the number? That 480,
As part of that number, we had some truck damages and those kind of things. Insurance reimbursements come back through that as well.
and the insurance reimbursement is from 2 years ago?
No, we had some car damage
So there's this year money in there as well. What I had hoped to do was just to make sure that that number didn't get lost, that money didn't get lost in the budget and spent without the commission's approval.
We won't spend anything outside the budget that, well, you can't say that, because we do, every now and then, we've got some items that do go in the red.
We can,
You know,
just as we do with the R&R reserve and capital reserve, where those are funded out of revenues for the year, we can set up another line item for funding of the operating reserve, and show that as, we show the money coming in on one side and the money going out to fund that operating reserve on the other, netting out to zero, which effectively makes it unavailable for expenditure.
Well, if we put it in the operating reserve, right, you're suggesting it would go into the operating reserve?
That would seem to be an appropriate location for it.
On the surface, it does. If we put it in the operating reserve, then we have 4 months requirement on that operating reserve. And so it would suddenly be 400,000 higher than 4 months. Where would that money flow to reduce it down to 4 months?
To reduce it down to 4 months?
Yeah, if the operating reserve goes up above 4 months by this $460,000, then where does that money flow out to?
The operating reserve wouldn't necessarily have to be decreased to that 400,000, or 4 months of expenditures. It could remain overfunded. The 4 months of expenditures is a bit of it's a commission set number.
Right.
So if you choose to say that that's the minimum, it's really more of a minimum funding level for that than it is an absolute value. And we
See,
don't-
in the meantime.
See, that's what I'm talking about. They need to sit and write all these procedures down, how it's gonna work.
Yeah, we
And
need
then
to
we need to
understand the
review that.
reserves.
You know,
All of them.
what?
We need to understand all the reserves and how the money's flowing in and out.
Well, I think, since we're talking about disaster right now, that there should be a set procedure as to how they're gonna initially fund major purchases and buys in it, how they're going to repair equipment that's damaged in the storm that's due to it, and then how they're gonna account for the money that is received from a FEMA reimbursement. And that all needs to be written out, and we need to look at that. Because aren't we talking about using the operating reserve to do the initial capital investment funding and damage repair funding?
It could be used for that initially, yes. But again, it would need to be replenished up to the minimum of the 4-month operating expense.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's what your reimbursement should give you to offset that.
I'm thinking that
The
in
re-
the big picture scope, I'm thinking of understanding what the overall needs are, prioritizing those, and this money, even though it's money that was spent 2 years ago and we had reimbursed, there may be another need that shows up on a higher priority level for this money during FY 2019 or
Yeah.
20
Well,
timeframe.
yeah, reserves aren't really tied to a fiscal year.
But I agree with the
And
point
there may be
Commissioner
some,
Copeland's making, that we've talked about this kind of in passing. Us and staff have talked about it as well. You know, we've got some opportunities. We're paying for some leases, and we're paying for, John, we got those pumps, we've got the VATCons, and we also have,
We also have in the project report later on in the financials, we have a project set up for the generators that we're working with FEMA on. And we do have to we have some cash outlay for that. So if that $400,000 could be moved into R&R and targeted for our share of the generated.
That's right, I forgot about that. There was another place that we could find a home for it. But I was thinking about the areas where we're paying interest now for the leases that we took out. Remember we took out the lease?
No, I know what you're talking about,
If that interest rate
I'm just not,
exceeds,
I guess I'm trying to keep everything in the same bucket.
well, all I'm saying, I thought I was kind of going where Chairman Copeland's going. If we're looking at the best financial outcome for us, where we're paying interest on other uses of funds, rather than having reserves that might be reinvested in something at 2.5 or whatever, if we're paying 3 or 4% interest on some lease, maybe it's time to pay those leases off and end those payments.
Yeah, there
Actually reduce our
may be
operating
a-
expenses.
There may be for this year, there may be a more important area, more cost-effective area for us to put those funds, as opposed to even in a reserve. I mean, we may need to spend them in order,
So now we're getting ready to treat the money like it's regular operating money.
only at the discretion of the commission.
Well, it may be at our discretion, but, you know, once you walk down that road, I just have a problem with that. I don't know.
For the time being, it's safe right where it is, isn't it? It's not gonna get spent. What you've answered for me is that it's not gonna get spent unless it's brought to the commission to get approval to spend it.
Yeah, pull it out of
Well,
reserves.
well, no, it's not in reserves now, is it?
No, we would have to make that cash transfer.
Yeah, it's not in reserves right now. He has to move it to it, and it's gonna come off of the income statement.
We would have to, set up the accounting mechanism to do it in the system. That won't take but a few minutes.
Well, I know, but it will no longer be reflected as revenue in this year.
Well, it'll be.
Overall, it will on the balance sheet, but not in the operating budget.
It will net to zero in the,
Right.
operating budget.
In the operating budget. So at the end of fiscal year 2019, line item 40 is still going to be there.
It would still show that, but then at the end of the financial statements, where it shows the transfers to the R&R reserve and the capital reserve, there would be another line item there of a transfer to the operating reserve.
And that would be zero commencing July 1 of fiscal year 2020.
Which would, at June 30th of 2019, or 2019, net to a zero, so that money effectively is not going to be made available for operations.
As we're set up right now, without any changes, when we get to the end of fiscal year 2019, if we have, and we will, the net income that we actually have, the positive balance, where does that go? Does it go into an R&R? Does it go into operating reserve?
Some of the cash access has to be held just simply for working capital, because we have about.
First, we meet the requirements of the reserves, and then we have some more left over.
Yes.
Where does that money go?
Well, some is held just for cash purposes to pay our bills and a balance in the checking account. The balance of it, the commission would have discretion to transfer that to specific commission named reserves. So you could, if we wound up the year with $1.5 million of revenue, the commission could say move $1 million of that to R&R or to capital or.
So in July, the commission would make a decision as to where any additional funds left over from fiscal year 2019 end up, where they go. That's the way it's happened in 2018 and 17 and 16. Is that what we've been doing?
The commission can do that, yes.
Ordinarily,
As
though,
long as there's enough cash to actually affect that transfer.
let me ask a kind of make
Cash
sure,
and revenue aren't necessarily the same thing.
So I don't want us to spend everything up that's left over at the end of 2019 in June, so that we end up with a zero.
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I was gonna just ask, my real elementary, understanding of process of funds is we collect revenues from whatever sources, including these refunds, and we got revenues for, operating revenues for this year. We expend monies out of that budget, and at the end of the year, when the audit's completed, the difference in the two, whatever that difference is, goes where? It goes as a lump, doesn't it, into the R&R?
Unless it's specifically designated by the commission as to where it goes, it stays in the operating accounts.
Not in one of the reserves.
There's not an automatic, there's not a mechanism for an automatic transfer of that to a reserve. That has to be a specific commission action.
We need a plan for that. We should close that gap at the end of the year. And you believe the time to do that is at the
Audit.
end of the audit?
Yeah, because
Maybe
at the audit,
December.
It doesn't necessarily need to be that late. We can determine the amount in.
Yeah,
do an initial transfer
I
and then
think,
correct it
I
based
think-
on the audit.
once you finalize and close out your books, the last thing that you're doing is transferring funds to the reserves for the year, correct? And that's what you should be doing. That's what, anything that's excess over what the operating budget requires, such as if everybody under executes, then all that should go into the R&R reserve or one of the other designated reserves by the commission. But initially, I would think that staff would recommend that anything that we don't require for operating expenses under our, well, anyway, more money that we have made ought to go into the R&R budget or reserve.
Would y'all be okay if we wrote,
No unused monies that June 30th are carried over to the next year. Everything
Right, I
starts-
mean, you start off with a whole new operating budget. And it's
I-
based on what the commission approves
If we
with
have-
the rate structure and all of that. On 1 July it starts. And then from that, you operate and you make $30 million. You have $26 million worth of expenses. There's $4 million left over. That gets moved to the R&R.
yeah, I'm sorry, John, I thought that's what happened automatically. I thought I didn't think it happened at the end of the fiscal year, I thought, but at the end of the audit,
We've actually only done that, I think, twice
yeah.
in our history because the year-end balances haven't been huge numbers.
I think what we should have,
Is a hard,
if we don't have this, what we should have would be that each of the reserves should have requirements, and they should be written. This is what the requirement is for funding this reserve, and this is the limit that we want it funded to for all of the reserves. At the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year, maybe at the end of the audit, when we're closing the books out, then we follow that procedure and fund those reserves. Whatever is left over becomes the question of what do we do with that extra money? Does it just sit in the operating budget, or does it move to one of the reserves to overfund them? And the commission should decide what to do with that money at that time.
Okay.
Do we have is there a procedure
There
that
is not one.
specifies all those things?
That's what we've been requested to write.
For all of the reserves? I think that's a good idea.
For the.
Is that what you were looking, you were just looking
Yeah.
for disaster?
Well, we've expanded now what we're talking about. But yeah, there ought to be a written procedure for everything.
For everything, that's
I don't know
right.
how that's done, because he already gets money in from the ratepayers regarding the R&R reserve, and you move that monthly in, correct?
Yes, we do a monthly true-up. Sometimes it's in, sometimes it's out, depending on the flow.
But within the operating, within the rate structure, there's a certain portion of it which is designated to go into the R&R account. And every month, he takes that and puts it into the R&R reserve. And then he tells the planning and construction engineer what his balance is in there and what's in the program, and they work through all that. And that means the planning, he doesn't really have more money, but he knows what the budget is or how much money he has for plans.
We know how much cash is in the actual reserves, how much we've.
Yeah, and
What we have encumbered on projects.
And what we've told you now is that since the interest is starting to accrue at a higher rate, that you should be doing where it's not sitting out there waiting for a home or waiting out there for a project to finish, but any cash flow is managed properly to where we're always drawing interest on that R&R money while it's not being used for outlay purposes.
Right. So what I've written down here, we can wrap this little discussion up, I think, is that we're going to prepare a procedure for funding the reserves and disposing of excess or deficit funds, the excess or the deficit, at year end.
Yeah.
And is that what we've agreed to do?
That's what I think
Who's going to write that procedure?
they are. I'm not writing it.
John?
John?
Say again?
There are some reserves that automatically are funded at the end of the year or throughout the year. The capital improvement fees, because there is a legal restriction on those are
They only go,
automatically done.
And that'd be in the procedure.
SPOS money is automatically done, but the operating reserve, capital reserve, the small expansion reserve, R&R reserve are all, they are restricted by commission action, so the commission has to take action to make any changes in that.
So we're going to write a procedure for funding the reserves, whether it be monthly or weekly or annually, whatever it is, and then how to deal with either the deficit or the excess at the end of the fiscal year.
And that,
Gotcha.
that will essentially be in the finance SOP, for lack of a better term, and
That y'all are working
how
on now.
finance works.
Item 3, unbudgeted equipment purchase.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, what this is about, we've had 3 vehicles hit by other people out in the community. You know, vehicles that were damaged not because of any fault of our drivers. Right now, we've got right at $29,000 that we've collected on insurance on 2 of them. The third one's estimated, we're having to do a little more paperwork on it for reasons I won't go into right now, that what we think will be another $7,000 on that vehicle. With that, if we're at $35,000, unfortunately, all 3 vehicles are meter reader vehicles. We are in dire straits. Our spare that they've been borrowing to get things done is out with a transmission. It was a ragged out truck that was left over from purchase before. We're out getting a transmission on it right now. Now, with the monies we've got, we can buy at least one vehicle to replace one of the 3. My request today is, there is a fund that we talked about, the $2.55 million fund reserve that was for, I thought it was for capital purchases, significant capital purchases. It's the one we put $300,000 a year into. My request would be to go into that and take out what we need to get the replacement trucks. But John reminded me that when we have overage in our budget, enough revenue over expenses, the commission has traditionally wanted us to expend out of operating revenues rather than reaching into reserves, which I'm fine with. But I want to let you know, we need to do one or the other. We need to move ahead with it.
So this capital reserve,
Procedure, but it's been mentioned at a couple of commission meetings that if we have a unbudgeted expenditure, if the operating budget is in a position to absorb that,
So let me understand a couple of things here. What you've suggested initially was to use the capital reserve, which was established by the JWSC at the issuance of the 2010 C revenue bonds to be funded at $300,000 per year. Is that still a legitimate need?
That reserve was established when we issued the 2010 bonds back in June of 2010. And again, that was to give the rate for the bond purchasers some assurance that money was being accumulated and held by the JWSC that could be used in case of emergencies and so on. That's now required under the new bond indenture for the 2017 bonds. It's not mentioned in that. So that money could be redesignated. It was set aside originally to accumulate some money as a down payment, if you will, if we need to borrow more money at some point.
So the 2017 bond issue, the reissue, replaced 2010 C bonds.
Yes.
And so that requirement no longer exists. There may be another need for 2017, but it hasn't been set up yet.
I believe the only reserve that's still mentioned in that is the operating reserve. The R&R may be mentioned in that, but that doesn't have any step on it.
So we have $2.5 million roughly that improves her financial position that is really at this point undesignated purpose of that reserve. It's no longer a valid need. There may be another need that's similar to it for the 2017 bonds, but we need to state that and what it is, and then decide if and how much of that $2.5 million should be moved there.
And that capital reserve was really established with the $15 million that we're applying for from chief, in the process of applying for from chief. That was really put there so that if the project was 18, we would have that 3 available, so we'd only have to borrow the 15.
Jimmy, how many vehicles?
Used for that purpose right now, but that was the original intent of that. And that was done by commission action, so that can be changed by the commission.
Get 3.
How many vehicles do you have for meters now, for meter reading?
I'm not sure of the exact number, but we're down 3, and the one spare we had, we've got 5 guys that are full-time reading. And what I'm understanding is 3 of them are without vehicles. We're just having to make it what we can. So I need 3.
So what I'm wondering is how many we have. If we have 5, sounds like we have 5.
We had 5.
And 3 of them are now gone. And did we receive any insurance reimbursement for any of these?
35, that was what I was discussing at first. We've received a little over, right at 29,000 so far off 2 of them. The other one, there was some issues with the insurance company, but we believe we'll still get, when all those are resolved, we'll still get about 7. So we're right at 35,000 total for all 3 vehicles that we'll get.
And there's no salvage value on the 3 vehicles, that's it.
We get the money and they get the trucks.
And we get 35,000. Now, what, are these are just small trucks?
No, one of them was truck, the other 2 were, the little, what's that Kia?
2013 Kia Souls.
Souls.
There was a Ford Transit Connect and 2
One was-
Kia Souls.
And one was actually a van.
Ford Transit Connect van.
So what is the replacement cost, do we believe, for these 3 vehicles?
Talking to Matt, the need we've got is to go to a vehicle larger than the Soul, because what we've got is our guys are having to do the replacement of all these registers that are going bad on us now that we've outlived their useful life. The little Soul doesn't have room for all the materials in it. It is just a very, very small vehicle. So they don't have what they need. And my understanding is they need at least a small truck to get it out there and get what they need out there with an extended cab. Not a four-door cab, just one with a little space behind the seat so they can put their tools and things that need to stay in out of the weather behind the seat. And the bed is big enough to carry the units themselves.
Why wouldn't you go with a fully enclosed
Van,
van?
why would we not, or why would we?
Why would you not?
That's what in talking to our guys, the fleet manager, that's apparently what they had worked up. Maybe they won't.
And we normally take this money out of operating funds
Normally, vehicle replacements are included in the operating budget.
because it was
I don't
It
understand
was
that.
budgeted for in 2018 for 2019. Do we have any
Okay.
budgeted
that's
money
not-
that's unused
that's not-
for vehicles?
Maybe I was misreading the budget,
John?
but you had vehicles in your budget that you said were capital equipment buys. Were you planning to buy that out of the operating budget? Or bill it against the operating budget?
The replacement of these damages,
No,
the numbers that are in the budget are planned replacements of vehicles that are worn out. These happen to be vehicles that were lost, that are, need to be replaced due to casualty losses.
what I don't think you ought to do is take a capital equipment requirement, which spans many years, and put it in an operating budget, which is one fiscal year. So I would say that you would
Do that
fund.
every year.
Huh?
We do that just about every year.
Well, are you gonna capitalize the item?
Well, we should capitalize and
Then it ought to
depreciate it.
be, you ought to fund the capital equipment reserve every year and come to the commission with what your capital equipment requirements are for purchase every year,
We do.
And we've been having internal discussions about that.
okay?
Jimmy, do you have unused vehicle funds that you're not,
John?
that you don't think you're going to use that were budgeted
anything
for
we didn't
2019?
Do we have any unused equipment budget that we not gonna order?
Vehicle.
No, they haven't fired off.
So,
I think you need, what we need is for you to put together the numbers. What do you want to spend? How many
right,
vehicles
just
do you want?
exactly. Okay,
And what do you want to spend? How many vehicles do you, what are the vehicles? Why do you need them? How much? 35,000 coming from disaster recovery or recovery from the insurance, and the net. And we can ask the commission to give you that money and ask where it needs to come from. Or, we need, make a recommendation on where it would come from, and I'm thinking the operating
Why would
budget
you put
is
it
where
in
it
the
would come from.
operating?
If I may, Commissioners?
That's what I don't agree with.
Well, the reason is because we have these reserves, and we need to understand what the purpose of each reserve is, how it should be funded, and then after we understand that, and we have our handle on the reserves, in the future, we can utilize these reserves for those purposes.
Well, I don't think that that's a big enough, we got a lot of money in the capital reserve, and I can't believe there's money just sitting around waiting for a capital requirement.
yeah, we've got some undesignated funds.
You talking about the 2.5 million?
At this point in the fiscal year, there is, we're running excess revenues over expenditures to this point.
Okay. Okay, the ratepayers would fund the capital equipment reserve through part of the rates that they pay. Okay? That ought to go into the capital equipment reserve and ought to be used to purchase capital equipment. If you need a new VACCON, that's where that money is collected and put.
And you're saying exactly what I was just trying to say, is that we've been having some internal discussions about taking some or all of that capital, that so-called capital reserve right now that is somewhat nebulous in definition,
Yeah,
and having the board redesignate some or all of that reserve as an equipment
Well, I've been totally lost, I guess, because I thought we were already doing that.
The thing I'm having a challenge with on using the capital reserve to purchase the vehicles is that it looks to me, based on the definition I've got right here for capital reserve, that that's a misnomer. That it says the capital reserve was established at the issuance of the 2010 revenue bonds, funded at an amount of $300,000 per year, intended to offset future borrowings. Now, why anybody called that a capital reserve instead of a borrowing reserve or something like that, I don't understand. Just because it's been labeled as a capital reserve doesn't mean we can spend it for something that it was not set up for. And that's the issue I'm having with it, is I want to understand all the reserves, what their purpose is, what their funding requirements are, and then use them for what they're intended for. And if we need other reserves, we can establish those, or if we can eliminate reserves, or lower the funding requirements, whatever, we can do that.
Where did we take the money for the VAT contracts?
We have a capital lease for that contract, and the lease payments are expensive.
Okay, but we didn't initially, and that's treated as, but we bought a whole bunch of other equipment a few years ago. Where'd that money come from?
There was a expansion reserve started a few years ago that was funded up to $1 million.
That's all right.
And then that was because of the extent of the capital request in the
Okay,
operating budget for that year.
Well,
about half
well,
of that.
we're still putting $300,000 a year into capital reserve.
Yes.
Okay, that's different from the money that we collect for tap fees.
Yes.
Okay,
That must be the capital improvement fee reserve.
then what I think that the staff should do is you ought to come back and segregate capital equipment buys and all that kind of stuff and put that in one reserve. You ought to have an operating reserve, repair and replacement reserve, and then someplace you need to have on this sheet here, you need to tell us what the balance is in tap fee money that we have to spend on expansion projects, or expansion reserve, okay, which is,
Yes, that's
that's,
actually put it on the
Ms. Funk. And you ought to write up what those definitions are gonna be, and come to us and tell us what the operating procedures are gonna be to fund those reserves. Okay, some of them are gonna come from the ratepayers, and we can defend that because in performing our job, we are using up capital equipment, and we need to purchase additional replacement capital equipment items out of that capital reserve. Now, the capital reserves, all the reserves should require commission approval before they're used for any purchase or any use other than what we agreed to up front.
We need to answer your question. On the vehicles,
Yeah, here's one of my reasons I came up kind of short on information. This got thrown in my lap kind of yesterday morning. I've got the fleet guy tracking down things. I was able to get the insurance reserve or refunds. Janice was able to get me those numbers this morning. My fleet guy hadn't made it in this morning before we met. I don't know the exact number. I guess what I'm gonna do is when we walk out of here, since we need to have more exact numbers of all this, we know we've got plenty of money in either of these sources that we just talked about. Not a question. They need the trucks right now. I'm gonna go ahead and have them go out and rent something to get us by, because the spare they've
we
been,
need something today.
I need help.
Okay, this is what you do. You come to the next commission meeting with what the prices are and a recommended sourcing.
What I want you to do is to get all the information together
Okay,
and get that to the three of us, these three commissioners.
and let y'all give me
We're gonna put together a recommendation that we will have at the next commission meeting to have as a approval item. And then we'll approve it then. So now all we have now is the gap to deal with.
Yep.
And if you can get that to us Well, I mean, we need to have it together before Friday.
Need today almost, to be able to
Need
get
our
it into
recommendation for
packet
the
so we
commission
can
together.
Get it all printed up for y'all. We get out, I'll track Matt down first thing, because he was supposed to be getting me quotes yesterday. And I don't know where he's got to, but he wasn't here this
But
morning.
then we need the gap handled. And you're just
Yeah.
you're gonna have to rent something in the meantime.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking.
So you're gonna rent 3 trucks.
Well.
Two trucks.
At least two,
Operating expense.
two vehicles of some kind, get us by.
Okay.
Okay, so we got that covered. So Jimmy's got an action item there, and he's gonna get the vehicle information together to the 3 of us, and we're gonna get an approval item together for the full commission. Next item, item number 4, cost savings realized and anticipated.
Okay, I wasn't sure. It said savings on the note sheet that we had, so I assumed it meant realized and anticipated.
Yeah,
So I've
realized and
kinda-
anticipated. Well, realized, certainly.
Things that
Okay.
we've done that are saving us money.
Who put this in here?
This came off the list that,
What-
Two of us kinda
define
put it together.
What do you mean by the word savings?
What I was looking for was monies that we are finding, were budgeted or not budgeted. Budgeted or not budgeted, that means anything. Certainly budgeted that we're not gonna spend because of some sort of savings.
operational change.
Operational change that we were able to come up with and broke this money loose, and we're not gonna spend it.
That's what I've got.
Okay?
The
That
400
really should
the
be labeled cost
460,000.
avoidance.
I didn't
What's in
include
that?
that in here. That, I was thinking of more of the things we're proactively doing that we've done things. That's a one-time hit. That's, it's one and done. I'm looking at the things that are on an ongoing basis, saving us funds over the long haul, not the one-time deals. I can go
Monies
back.
from a bond refinance that may
Yeah.
be impacted this year
I
would be
can
a
go-
savings.
I didn't get the one-time stuff. I just got the ongoing opportunities. At any rate, let me run through them, and we can talk more about it. Okay. Stagger shifts. One of the things we did for the SP&M group, our folks that work on the collection system and our pump stations, lift stations, basically, we've gone to a staggered shift with them. What does that mean? They've taken one crew and set them up to come in later in the day, which means all these first thing in the afternoon calls we get, early evening calls they get, instead of having to call somebody back out on overtime to work on them, we've got a team that's already out there doing PMs or other inspections, that kind of thing. And they just pick up the call, and it's regular work hours for them. So we've got a crew, and they're rotating bodies through it, so nobody gets the punishment of being on that. Where I was at before, we had people that liked that shift, so it wasn't a problem. We had people that wanted to work that odd shift to come in a little later. But we've got them doing it now. It should be returning us dividends right now in the way of reduced overtime primarily. We just implemented this here in the last about 6 weeks, so I can't tell you to the extent that it's really hit home for us.
And you believe that was budgeted overtime then, that won't
Yeah,
be spent?
that we're.
Yeah, but you
we're
were already
reduced
excess on your overtime.
in some areas, and they're one of them. But this'll help. This will help. The other thing we did, which was further back, we revised the SCADA programming, which had them going out and responding to, if we get a high-level alarm on a lift station, they're supposed to go out and check it. Well, it was triggering high-level alarms at unusually low levels, so we've gone back and reprogrammed all that. SCADA is now working to a point where we don't get unnecessary triggers and off hours. But if it's after hours and the new crew can cover it, it's not as big a deal. But we've done those things for SP&M. The other thing that we've done that's, I think, here fairly recent, we've started weekly maintenance scheduling. What do I mean by weekly maintenance scheduling? We're going out and scheduling a full week in advance. So we check out the jobs, we do the planning, we understand what the obstacles and materials are they need, we make sure everything's done, so we don't waste time and resources by sending people out in a reactive fashion on the day they do the job and not have it done. So those are a little bit hard to quantify, but I'm certain added planning improves the cost impact on our organization. Coming up, things that we anticipate doing that'll be in the works here in the near future. We're going to be, Andrew's looking at purchasing trucks to get us in the sludge hauling business to the landfill. We're paying an exorbitantly high price, we think, for it, and we think we can purchase the equipment, add an individual to drive the stuff to the landfill, and we're going to save possibly a six-figure savings based on, low six-figure savings based on just the haul cost of sludge. The next thing,
And we would own the vehicles, and we would,
it's ours.
We're gonna
and
do-
we would
we're
have
gonna-
the people,
It'll be our person.
employees,
And our
everything.
employee, our,
Is that gonna require an increase in staffing?
possibly, but possibly not, because we've got, Andrew and I have been talking about, there seems to be some areas that we seem to have ongoing vacancies. And his theory, and I can't disagree with him, is if they've been without those bodies this long, do they really need them? But some of those bodies are gonna go into another issue that we talked about, Steve and I talked about previous. Now, I'll get to that in just a second. But even if we do have to add, my understanding is it's a winner.
Okay, can you bring a business case analysis that says that this is a good thing to do?
We will, he's getting the pricing right now on the truck. We're trying to confirm pricing, so it's just things we're working towards doing. Drying the sludge. One of the things we've figured out is the cost of operating Sarah and using methane saves us a lot of money when we're hauling 95% solids instead of 18% solids. The haul cost goes dramatically down. We also get a huge reduction in the, what do you call it, the tipping fee at the landfill. So one of the things we're looking at for the rehab needs in that GFA loan we're talking about to fix up Academy Creek, number one, we want to look at putting in a system that can receive hoppers or roll-off boxes from the other two plants and bring their sludge here to Academy Creek, allow us to get more mileage out of Sarah.
sludge
dry more.
consolidation.
Sludge consolidation.
Now, then you're gonna rehab Sarah, do we have any estimate on what amount of sewage that can process
I
per
don't
day?
have it, well, we don't operate it.
And what the
but
life
just a few
expectancy
hours.
is? With,
We just operate it a few hours a day when it's running. So, you know, if we had to run an extra few hours over, we've got operators there around the clock.
well, are we gonna rebuild it enough to where it'll have an operating life?
Yeah, we'll have to rebuild it. We're going to rebuild it to like new standards. And
That'll
they're
all
go-
be in your business case,
Right.
all of that.
Right, which is to come. The aeration basins, one of the things they've got right now is the process control of oxygen going into the aeration basins. They basically take a look at the dissolved oxygen in the mixed liquor going through the unit. Unfortunately, the probe that checks it, there's enough sludge and gunk built up that frequently the probe doesn't even see what the true mixed liquor looks like. It's not getting true representative samples. And talking to the guy, the expert that came out and looked at the aeration basins and did a little on-site training for running the UNOX systems, the technology out there today to get better operation out of those things doesn't look at dissolved oxygen in the mixed liquor. It looks at the rate of oxygen use and the CO2 concentration in the vapor space above the mixed liquor in those enclosed basins.
Is this out at Dunbar?
Academy Creek.
Oh, at Academy.
Yeah, Academy Creek's the only pure oxygen. All these changes will come as part of the upgrades or the fixes, not upgrades, the improvements to get the plant running better and more reliably. But with those changes, we should be able to realize some significant reductions in oxygen use.
Okay, so how are you gonna reduce it? You're gonna clean out the
You're gonna-
aeration basins?
No. What it does, instead of relying on a probe that sits down in the mixed liquor, sits down in the goop,
Uh-huh,
there is technology, according to this expert, that actually looks at the rate of use of your oxygen. And it actually, it can use the concentration of carbon dioxide in the vapor space above the mixed liquor. It has an online analyzer measuring that CO2, and based on the concentrations there, it can tell us whether we need to increase or decrease the oxygen flow to a given basin. That being said, that'll get us more efficient, because right now, they let it go pretty hard, and we can, there's times out there when the mixed liquor, the dissolved oxygen in mixed liquor may be as much as 9 or 10 parts per million. You only need 2 or 3 parts. Well, what's the difference in oxygen you're pumping in there? So we need to be more effective and efficient. One of the things we want to do is change the technology that manages or does the process control to keep that oxygen at the optimal level for the process to do its thing and keep the waste treated. So that's going to be a significant, although again, there's still a lot, it's the conceptual thing that we're planning on doing as part of the design process. So I can't tell you today the
Right.
business case. Revenue recovery with large meter testing. One of the things that Ms. Roberts will tell you about is when we initiated large meter testing over in Tuscaloosa, the anecdotal story I told the folks in strategic business plan meetings was, we're going to add a large meter testing team, a 2-man team. We're going to buy them a tester, which is probably a $7,000 or $8,000 investment. Put them in a truck, and they're going to go out and test our large meters, 2-inch and greater meters.
Revenue meters
Revenue meters.
at large customers,
Right. 'Cause
essentially.
What happens
Mhm.
on those old meters, as time goes on, those positive displacement meters actually slow down. Build up, wear and tear, whatever. They don't measure as accurately.
And this
They
is for
never
water.
speed up.
This is for water
It's for water.
measurement. Okay.
They never speed up. They always slow down. It's a matter of how much they'll slow down. When we started the program over in Tuscaloosa, we took the 50 largest by volume customers. The biggest volumes mean the biggest opportunity, and went out and did the meter testing on those largest customers. When the guys had gotten through the list after about 6 months of testing meters, the projected savings from that process were $750,000 a year. So you can see they more than paid their salary and the expense we incurred in getting them set up and trained. It takes about 2 days of training to get certified on testing those meters and then getting them out there. We're gonna take that approach. We're gonna do the same thing here. I don't know that, we had some big volume users over there that far exceed most of the big volume users here, but I'm not saying, we're gonna have some savings. It's an ongoing program that we'll have to maintain to keep from losing track here and there where we might, lose accuracy. But we'll recover somewhere on the order of $750,000. No, I'm not $750,000. That's what we did over there. We'll be recovering some large revenues as a result of doing the large meter testing. And I can't tell you, if you look at we looked at the numbers the other day, and there was 2.5 million a year in large meter flows or revenues. If you assume, you know, a lot of these meters haven't been tested since the day they got put into place, that we've got a 10% issue, then we're talking about maybe $250,000 a year in recovered revenues. You may not lose that much every year, but if you're staying on top of it,
It'll accumulate.
it'll accumulate.
What else? That sounds like a good one.
That's the ones I had on my list for right now, as far as.
How about, can we add energy audit of some sort into that one?
I asked Andrew about that, and he said he could. What I thought, as far as energy audits go, we go back and look at our SCADA. We look at the run hours on all of our pumps. For the ones that have significant run hours, we go out and figure out if VFDs will be where we don't already have them, do we have opportunities there? The other thing that we talked about was if you look at the pump efficiencies, the motor efficiencies today versus 20 years ago for the older pumps, the older motors that we have in our system, if we can go back and determine which ones are, 1985 or before, we'll go back and look at the run times on them. We can go out and measure the efficiencies of the motors today to see if they're, because I think back in those days, 75 or 80% efficiency was about the maximum you got out of a pump motor. Today, you're required by law to have 95% efficiency in the motors that they sell off the shelf. You can't have anything less. If they're running enough hours, I know over there when we looked at it, there were some applications that had a 1.5 year ROI because of the difference in motor efficiency. We're not set up just yet, but we want to get to that point to get out there and do those surveys and get our folks to generate what the current operating efficiencies are on the older motors, so that we can then look at the, so I don't have numbers for these either. This is just a concept that we're talking about.
On energy efficiency, and those items are definitely energy related and appropriate. In addition to those, I was thinking in terms, and I know I brought this up, several people have, and we haven't really come to resolution on the idea of bill consolidations, for one. Looking at, this is to deal with the power company, and to talk with the power company about consolidating certain metering points that they have for our electricity usage, because we've got a $2.5 million electricity budget. And look at those metering points, and by the way, those revenue meters need to be accurate too, for the power company. The power company's revenue meters.
That's their problem.
That's right, they slow down too. So there would be looking at those metering points and the idea of consolidating those metering points and looking at the rate that we have, the rate structure we have, what rate plan they have us on, the rate plans that are available, and whether or not we can have a different rate plan that may have a peak component. They have energy and capacity components, and the capacity is the peaking component, the energy is the amount of kilowatt hours you use. If we can get on a plan that we can control our peak and we're billed based on capacity, and we can reduce that, the annual capacity, then we can reduce our bill. And we can reduce that capacity by some of the things that the capacity requirement, by some of the things that you mentioned, energy efficiency,
Right.
but also, and variable frequency drives potentially, although they're going to be expensive, but that would be utilization of the equipment
We'll
at
have to
that
do the business.
metering point.
We'll have to do the business case for each one.
Right. And then we also have the ability to test our generators during the peak. So we have backup generation at those facilities, and we need to run those backup generators on a regular basis anyway. So if we have a summer peak, and we know that there are certain days of the week in the summer that are forecasted to have high temperatures, then you can assume the system is going to be in a peak. If it's a weekday, usually, it doesn't typically happen on a weekend, then we can run those generators to test them, because we got to test them anyway, test them in the peak and reduce that demand requirement, that capacity requirement. If we're on that bill rate structure with the utility, with the electric utility, we may have to move to that bill structure.
We got a meeting with.
Just have that discussion with them and see if we can't. And they're liable to tell you, you can't run those generators for generation because of the emission requirements.
Yes.
But we can run them to test them, because we have to run them to test
As long as
them.
you keep below certain hours, total hours for the year.
And we can test them during the peak.
Okay. We got that meeting with, the local rep this Friday,
Great.
Palo Albuquerque. And, my understanding is that's more or less, we're gonna be talking about the meter replacement program, but my understanding was we'd also be talking about this program you're talking about, where are the opportunities for us to get some, peak billing rate opportunities to supply our own and get off.
They call it
the edge.
RTP.
But,
They used to call it RTP.
yeah. And for testing purposes, that makes perfect sense. But anything beyond that would, the cost of fuel.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we buy generators.
No, I know, I just meant.
I'm just suggesting we
to
use
run
the ones we
buy.
have.
Yeah, to run them outside testing, outside what you need. We did some numbers at my other job, and it's pretty expensive to run those things compared to even peak period rates. They're not cheap to keep online.
The thing where it helps you, when you're on that RTP rate, you have a charge that is based on your annual peak, or your usage, your capacity component, the fixed component, during the system's annual peak.
Yeah,
And then by reducing that, that factor is carried through 12 months. So you don't just get a savings for those few hours that you operate.
there's a big picture.
You get an energy savings for those few hours that you operate. It's actually probably more expensive to buy, to make the energy than it is to buy it from the utility, from a variable price. But from the fixed component, that carries throughout all 12 months. And so it ripples, and it becomes cost effective. But you gotta be set up so that all of the metering points are consolidated in that location, like at a wastewater treatment plant. All of those metering points, if you have 3 of them there, are consolidated, so you got one number that you're dealing with to reduce.
Okay. Who comes in and does that consolidation?
The utility it would be a negotiation between, it would be the same thing as us if we had 3 revenue meters
At a business,
at a pulp and paper mill, 3 revenue points, and they said, we want all these consolidated into one. You can meter them, you can meter all 3 of them, leave the same meters in there, but we want you to add the 3 numbers together and give us one number. This is what you needed during each hour.
Yeah.
This is how much water you took during each hour. You took this much, therefore,
Okay, so it's
that's
not
what you're gonna bill
necessarily the
us on.
consolidation of physical assets, it's more a consolidation
Of the
of the
bill.
data, so that you can see how you're operating, and that way determine what your peak hours are, and you'll be able to understand the cost per unit, meaning we'll be able to better analyze quickly what the cost of operating Academy Creek is, from an energy standpoint.
From an energy standpoint, we may have, let's say there's a bill at Academy Creek, we have 3 bills, I don't know what they are, how many we have, but let's say we have 100, one of them says, the number of kilowatt hours you used, and the capacity, you had a 600 kW max during that hour. And over here at this meter, they're measuring a 200 kW max during that hour. And over here at this meter, they're measuring a 100 kW max. Now we got 900 kW, but they're sending us 3 bills. And if we run the generator over here by the 100 kW and we reduce that peak, our savings is only against that 100 kW bill. Well, we want to run that 200 kW generator against the 900 kW so that it impacts the entire usage at that facility. They would like to bill us 3 different ways because it's more revenue for the same electricity they're selling. We want to negotiate it so that it's all piled together
So
in
what you're
one
saying
pile.
is it reduces their fixed charges?
It
is there-
reduces their fixed charges. That's
So,
exactly right.
so that we do it. Because we can do the same estimate internally, but we can't negotiate a reduction in the fixed cost to one bill. And that's what you're talking about, right?
Well, we can't if we don't ask.
Okay. I mean, what you're trying to do now is reduce the fixed cost that would be charged by Georgia Power for each plant, essentially.
They have the ability to bill based on expansion requirements. It's kind of like a SIP, capital improvement fee. So they know that they have to build X number of megawatts every year in order to meet the growth requirements in the system. They can therefore compensate customers for reducing that need of building.
The capital outlay.
That's right. And so there were a set of laws way back during Jimmy Carter timeframe called the Purple Laws, where it was set up so that power companies had to reimburse, or accommodate build reduction. So they look at their plan and they say, well, this is how much it's going to cost us to build, and this is how much impact you had to that plan. This is the amount of savings that you directly have on this utility, and there's law in place that requires that they push that money back in some way to the people to incentivize the customers to reduce that expansion need. So they will incentivize big customers to spend money to reduce that expansion so that they don't have to build that expansion. So that's the underlying issue that we're dealing with, and that's the reason they want to do it. They want to go forward with it. But you got to get to the guys in the corporate office.
Well, Paolo was supposed to be talking to us Friday, and I'm pretty certain that's the other piece of the discussion. Meters and these RTP rates and the opportunities to use the generators, as you say, to offset some of those peak uses.
See, if they have one substation over there, and they've got 3 lines coming out of it, and we have 3 meter points, what difference does it make to them physically if we add the 3 up? Now, if they have 3 different substations coming from different distribution substations, we have 3 different lines coming into that facility, that's a little different story because the configuration, just like us with a trunk, we have 3 different trunks that are delivering, and they each have a cost. But if it's all coming down the same trunk and it's split up 3 ways, well, it wouldn't be fair to us or fair to our customer for us to bill them 3 different ways out of that same trunk. You see how it kind of comes together?
I do. Makes sense.
So that's what we're
I'm with
talking about.
you. I got you.
All right. Performance of investments.
Commissioners, in the financial packet that we handed out to you earlier, there's a sheet on the summary of the purchase higher interest rate vehicles.
Who makes the decision on what we purchase?
We set parameters on the portfolio in terms of maximum length of maturity in those. And the repair and replacement reserve, we were looking at very short term because those monies may need to be used more quickly than, say, the operating reserve that can sit there until an emergency happens.
John, what I was looking for here,
That could be maybe loosened a little bit if that is the restricting factor.
what I was looking for is the idea, and we've talked about it some, and you may have talked with John some about, tried to translate what I was saying. I don't know. But the concept I was looking at was I look at when I say investment performance report, really I'm not trying to see all the detail. Every little bond that we bought, I'm not trying to see all of that. I'm just looking for a number that shows up on the scorecard. If we have a scorecard, we've got a number that shows up that this is how much money we have invested, and this is the return that we're getting on that.
These summaries that you have in front of you do essentially that. For instance, the operating reserve, I have a reconciliation between what's in the investment account, being the investments held in cash and so on, of $6 million, $6,020,000. Below that, you can see we put $6 million into that. We transferred $6 million into that reserve. Received $25,000 interest income, $484 on maturities, and then had some fees in there. So that's the actual year-to-date transactions in that account. Then just below that, based on the current portfolio in that account, the annual income, which is the par value times the stated interest rate, would be $105,556. And based on what we paid for those investments, the composite rate based on cost would be 1.76, and at the face value of the securities would be 1.72. So we've purchased most of those securities at discounts.
Okay. This doesn't have what the bank fees are for,
No,
On-
I don't have that listed on here as yet. I just got this put together yesterday afternoon.
okay, somehow, I think what you have to do is consolidate this and so that there's one number. I mean, have this as backup, and have this, I think what you're after is one number on all the investments. And
all
then,
5 reserves and
What I'm thinking is, if we do a pro forma sources and uses, and we come up monthly, let's say we say monthly, this is what our minimum balance is anticipated to be of all of our funds. Maybe we expect to spend $3 million next month, or we expect to spend 1.5, and we're going to bring in 3 through billing, and we're going to have $28 million of reserves, or 27, whatever it is, sitting there, and some of that money is going to flow out to pay on some projects, and we're going to have some monies there. And at the bottom, with all the numbers, all the income, and all the money that's on deposit, and all the expenses, at the bottom comes out a number, and it's, I don't know, $30 million, or maybe it's $15 million. There's some number at the bottom that is not being used, that won't be touched that month. If we do that for every month for the next 12 months, and we forecast this, then we can say, okay, well let's say it's $15 million. That $15 million that falls off the bottom, that's never touched. We can take that money and we can put that one in a 12-month instrument. And then maybe there's a $1.5 million that we see we have that's needed 6 months from now, that can't be in a 12-month investment. then we can take that 1.5 million and we put that in a 6-month investment. And we can do that by month so that the monies flow and we're keeping as much as possible in savings. Now, we don't want to cut it too closely, but we do have the 5 million credit line. That if for some reason we missed it by $100,000 or we missed it by $1 million, we could dip the credit line, we could take the money from the credit line to cover, and then when that money rolls, so that we don't have to sell the investment, then when that money rolls out, then we can repay the credit line. That's the kind of concept that I'm thinking about with investment of the funds. And I realized that the market moves up and down. The interest rates move up and down. The discounts on these bonds change. The yield changes literally on a daily basis. And so something that we bought 6 months ago, since rates have risen, the yields are better today than they were 6 months ago. And so if we pull a number out of the sky and we say, holy cow, look, we can get 2.5% on T-bills, just buying T-bills, it's hard to compare that against what we did 6 months ago when T-bills were only paying 1.9 or whatever they were paying. But we're trying to keep a little running tally of this so that we're maximizing our investment, a return from our investment. That's really what I'm after there with the cash flow. I'm not trying to get into the detail of where's this one invested, how much is it, which instrument did you choose. I'm just trying to get a report every month that shows the status. Does that make sense?
Your interest is in keeping as much of our money working for us as possible.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay.
And there are other mechanisms that we could use too, such as our instead of leaving money in a checking account that doesn't earn anything, we can establish with KeyBank or with BGJWSC Bank overnight money rates for just day-to-day deposits. We're just kind of getting our feet on the ground and doing this. I understand how all of this works, but getting the manpower together, and then, for instance, with the R&R reserves, getting with planning and construction to see when they have these expected cash flows and we can time those investments. We're still learning on that.
Right,
We're still
right.
getting procedures in place and getting people used to planning the money as well as planning the project. We're helping to plan the money as well as planning the project. But it's kind of a growing thing for us. I understand what you want to do.
Well, now that interest rates are rising, or have risen some, there's some money to actually be earned.
Well, I guess the question I have is, we bought those investments at a particular cost, and if interest rates rise, then the yields go down.
No, actually, once we buy them, the yield is locked in because
The yield that we're getting on them, that's correct, but as interest rates go up on the bonds or on whatever investment thing we have now,
we can sell the lower yield.
well, what happens is the price gets discounted if we want to go to a higher yield. So it becomes quite a,
There's a big balance in that.
yes.
How much are we going to lose in the change in discount versus how much are we going to pick up in terms of the new discount and the new state?
Well, I mean, you were saying, you looked at the composite rate based on cost, that's what, is that the yield, or is that the percent that you got?
The first number is the actual yield. That's what we,
1.76.
the interest that would be paid versus how much we actually paid for the securities. In total for all of them.
Okay,
It's really an average of the entire portfolio. Some of them are as high as 3.25. Some of them are as low as just over 1%. So I need to better understand how the investment folks are going out and purchasing these things.
well,
Perhaps give them different direction.
As the program goes, as you continue to work with this, then you're going to get better and better at it. And you're not, we won't be recreating the wheel every month. It'll just be tweaking it each month.
It took me an afternoon to figure out or find out what information that we can actually get out of the website as far as the transactions that are going on with the.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure that we don't have $6 million in one interest rate and we sell and the cost and the yield change and all that means that we devalue our investment portfolio.
Understood.
Yeah.
There are several moving parts that we have to evaluate in any.
And when I look at the comparison, when I look at T-bills, and this is just what's available to us as individuals, I don't know if you can go to treasurydirect.gov and purchase T-bills for a company. I don't know, T-bills and T-bonds and notes.
I
But-
think you can, but again, we're getting our feet on the ground and we don't have a whole lot of men. Right now, it would just be with Donna and me and with some of the other things that we've got going on as well. The time demands would be pretty significant for us to do that, I think.
That could be a bogey, the target that we work against. And if we're looking at T-bills and we say, okay, at the auction last Monday, it was paying 2.3% for a three month, for a 13-week bill. And so I think I can probably get about the same at the next auction. So what is it that the guy at BB&T is telling me we can do with this $3 million that's about to break loose? He's got to beat that, because we don't have to pay any fees over there, and we do at BB&T. So he has to beat whatever the risk-free rate is.
Those treasury bill rates are published daily on the website, so we can look at that and see what they're purchasing on our behalf. And then we really need to manage the broker to make sure that he's getting us the things that we want.
If they can't beat what the risk-free is, then we go the risk-free and use it. It'll just roll right back out.
The investments in each of those portfolios are all pretty much risk-free. They're treasury bonds, or treasury notes, agencies and corporations, or government corporations, federal home loan bank and those kind of things. They're all federal government securities.
Well, I'm glad you're learning about it and working on that. And I know with time, it's gonna,
There's nothing, my history is nothing new to me, but in this particular position, it's something that I wanted to get started for some time, but until Latana came on board, we haven't really had the time to set aside.
and we've come out of a period in the economy where interest rates were close to zero. But now, they've drifted up some. That brings us to performance report for the commission, number 6.
Mr. Chairman, basically, we have a requirement to do once every 5 years, John, is it like a performance audit?
It's in the,
I-
it's required within the enabling legislation.
What I did, because of the investigating the history of this performance audit, the previous go-round that they did for this back in 2014,
And Commissioner Elliott, you probably remember when you first came on the commission that the Vincent Institute was hired to do the first one.
Yeah.
but what I looked at was the fact that, what were they called? Vincent? Vincent, that's right, Vincent Institute, sorry. The Vincent Institute did a performance audit that was more geared towards the number of bodies you have doing different things. And it's hard to benchmark yourself necessarily against something like that. So before we embarked on spending money on something that will prove to be virtually useless, I thought it might be more beneficial to talk to the Finance Committee about what we see as important in analyzing performance. It's not a financial audit in the sense that what the auditors do for us. It would be, in my suggestion would be that we look at doing something that would look at overall performance of the entity, both in operations and in finances. Look at trends and where are we going, how do we stack up? And I made a call out to the guys at Raftelis. And they've done this for a number of utilities. Typically, it's for the larger utilities that they've worked for, but they sent me some copies. I think I emailed you guys copies, and I brought the ones I emailed to you guys. But the one that impressed me the most was the Nashville, water utility in Nashville. And basically what it did was take the 10 attributes of effectively managed utilities. It got the data from.
Yeah, I remember looking at these. You sent us this one, I think. Did you send us
I sent
Greensboro?
both.
Yeah, they were both
Should
on
have come together on the same email.
Yeah, they were there.
At any rate, the Nashville one does in fact look at 10 attributes, and I think that's the one in Commissioner Elliott's hand.
Mhm.
But it looks at, it does a gap analysis. Where should we be versus where are we?
I like that.
And it does, if I understood correctly, it also assesses, within the ranges of the industry, certain attributes within the document that allow you to see where you rack up, if you're, or where you rank. If you're, not doing so well, you're, below where you ought to be by a significant mark, well, then you're in the red. And if you're doing great, then you're in the green, those kind of things. It's a kind of it's a pretty nice report to give us a good idea of what we've been doing and what we continue to do if we are heading in a overall positive direction on all fronts. I thought I would talk it over with you guys and get your opinion on what direction you wanted to go. If something like this would be the kind of format, or if there's something else you guys would rather see, because if anything, it helps tell you all, it's for the commission, what you want to know about where we're at.
And this is based on the 5-year study requirement?
No,
that you're talking about?
I don't know whether it was a 5-year or exactly how many years they took to generate the analysis of the Nashville, but what I would suggest is if we could take 5 years of data, take the data from our audits and for the financial aspects to see where our trends are as far as financial metrics and benchmarks. But overall, something that measures our performance as an entity and tells us where we're strong and where we're weak and what do we need to maybe do, and if they can make recommendations specific because of their vast knowledge of what they've seen around the industry, great. But before we embarked on doing something, I wanted to run it by you guys and get your temperature on it and see if you had any thoughts that we could take back and get started.
What's the cost range?
I've got to call in on that. I don't have a number yet.
On the surface, I'm not against it,
But
but
it-
cost will be a factor.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I feel.
I knew.
What's the value of it and how much does it cost?
I haven't gotten the answer yet, but I'll get that. If you want me to get that and forward that to you guys, I'll do it.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
All right.
Get the information, get it to
Do
us.
you like the template of the Nashville document?
I guess I would have to look at it in more detail to know for sure, but it certainly looks interesting. I mean, they have a lot of good information in here.
It is a requirement of our legislation, so
That's what I was wondering about. This is to meet the 5-year requirement, is what you're suggesting.
Oh, yeah. That was your question?
every
Yeah.
5 years, and there's no timeframe defined in that, they could just be an update or look at us as we are now, as I recall.
Have we ever done it before?
Yeah,
They
Vincent,
did, but that was what I was talking about. They did it in terms of body count and not a very,
well, at that
Useful
time, the
analysis.
utility really wasn't organized well. And I would,
Let me take a deeper look at this.
yeah, I
I'll get
think,
you guys a number.
Okay.
I think this is how I feel about it. I think we need to do the performance audit, and I think going back 5 years, which may be a struggle for them, because the data's gonna be very dissimilar in the early years.
Get a starting point?
Yeah, and then that way you'll have a point where in 5 further years, you can really see what you've done.
This item number 6, performance report for the commission, is that one that you added to the agenda, or is that the one that I had?
I did.
Okay.
That's this.
I had one on my list that had to do with a report to the commission. And that was the idea that we would condense the financial report for the commission. Now, the financial committee would have detailed reporting, like we're going to look at today with all of the detailed, line items. We could literally have line items, but we don't, in the income revenue statement, but we don't want to do that in the commission meetings. What the other commissioners are hoping that we will be able to do with the committee is to vet all of the information in the various committees before that information comes to the full commission, and then that the full commission can have a streamlined report. And so I was thinking that we would have I like the balance sheet, which is basically 1 page. They can see the balance sheet. And then I'm playing with this idea of very high-level summary, and I'd like to see the summary, and that's by division code. Just what's the total number? If it's 2.1 million for public information, that's the only number on the page. It's 1-page
Operating
snapshot
report.
of by division code.
Yeah, John put that together.
You'd rather see that by division code than by a breakdown between personnel, operating, and capital expenses. There is a condensed revenue statement here. So you want that by division rather than this, or you want that?
I guess I'd have to look at the two side by side to compare it.
This is kind of in your email to us. John put this together based on that email that you sent, and this is by division.
And it's just one number.
It cooks it down to,
It's where we were supposed to be and where we are and where we'll probably end up being at the end of the
that's what this is.
FY total. And I think the full commission, that's what they need to see.
Okay.
Does that have revenue, is that a full income statement?
No, this is, just the expenses.
Just by the division, it needs to be a full income statement.
Well, I think that's.
A snapshot.
That by division instead, that's gross.
Yeah, this is gross.
I can't find the page that you've got.
This piece of information
is
right
one
here is
that
a
I-
good one too.
John did this. for me.
Combined revenue statement.
This is not part of his own.
The report that he's looking at is not in there, that, I did that, just as out of an Excel
Okay.
spreadsheet.
Okay,
This is high level for the commission to look at.
okay,
We
what you
throw in
want,
those numbers and it's just a sea of numbers
okay,
for them.
I think that if I understood what you were talking about, that you would have, the water department, and that would include the water production and water distribution, and you'd have the revenue that we got for water revenue. That doesn't have that. You'd have then,
Let me take a look at that.
that's pretty much just expense. Then you'd have water expenses, and that would have the expenses that, water production and water distribution had, and then you would net out how much income or loss was achieved for that. And then you'd have, wastewater collection and disposition, and you'd have what the, sewer plant expenses are, and then the sewer, systems and pumping expenses, and then that would have a line, and then you'd have what you got in sewer revenue, and look at it.
So,
Take the revenue report and tag it on to that.
in our system, the GL numbers They all start with 500. And then you have a division code. And every dollar in the system somewhere is assigned to a division code. And so this sheet, which are I guess these are the operating divisions.
Mm-hmm. And others. It's all the
1, 2,
folks
3,
that
4,
expend money.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 of them on here.
That's all for the cost division.
I'm envisioning there's a line item, a division number for every dollar that's in our reporting system. And that they can be rolled up, all those dollars can be rolled up by that division number. And some of them are going to be revenues and some of them are going to be
Well,
expenses.
that's where you get into problems. Because Academy Creek is part of the effort for the whole wastewater treatment, because we built sewer, but that includes all the people that takes to collect it and all the maintenance of the pipes to get it to the sewer plant and the sewer plant. And that's what I was saying. So you'd have one for the sewer, which says what you achieved in sewer revenue, and then what the expenses are for sewer.
Are the revenues mixed in with the expense division codes? Are they separate?
They're separate.
There's a separate division code for those. Typically, the sewer operations usually start with a 343, and then there are 2 digits following that. Revenues for sewer are just 4,300. There's no, the first 2 digits with 2 zeros. But that breaks up the direct revenues for sewer. Same for water, it'd be 400.
Yeah, so,
Some of the other revenues, as far as user-based revenues, those are broken out, but other fees and services aren't necessarily broken out by division. For instance, the late fee calculation, there isn't any, really any way to break that out, just how much is water and how much is sewer. So that's considered an administrative revenue.
oh, I see. You have 4,300 sewer charges. Under sewer revenues, we have 4,300, 4,300s, and then you have the unique identifiers, sewer usage charges, industrial surcharge, leak adjustment. Well, those are all charges. Those aren't revenues, are they?
Well, same thing.
Yeah,
Oh, those are
yeah. leak
charges to our
adjustment-
customers. Those
yeah,
are our
leak
revenues.
adjustment, Leak is contra revenue because it's money we give back that we charged.
And then when we get to sewer expenses,
Any division starts with a 4-3.
it's still a 4,300?
They begin with 4-3, and then there are 2 digits subsequent to that. 4331, for instance, is systems swapping and maintenance. 4333 is the collections.
Okay, so it's not 4,300, it's 4331 or 4335 or 4336.
Yeah, they all fall within the 4-3 numbers, beginning with a 4-3, but the last 2 digits of the division are the actual
So,
separation point.
so there could be a snapshot,
So water is all 4-4.
there could be a snapshot with a unique 4-digit identifier line items.
The system can be,
Division
they're
item.
called ad hoc. There are ad hoc reports within the system, and you can have
Yeah, like this report could have a 4,300 on it,
pretty much any.
Yeah,
which is revenue.
and just stuff it in there.
And there could be a 4,400 on
So
here,
you want them
which
stacked
is revenue.
sequentially.
Well, I like the revenues and then all the expenses, but all of the,
Yeah,
But do you
we-
want to see them separated? Do you want to see all the revenue together and then all the
all together,
expenses together?
all the expenses
we do
together.
just like this, except the revenue would be in the
That's
stack
right.
here.
But I don't want to have all of the different revenue,
Line items.
line items. I just want one
He just
for
wants the sewer-
4,300
Sewer use revenues.
total
water
summary.
revenues.
It's just a big picture, one line per division code. I'm calling this a division code. 4,300, the revenues for sewer, 4,300, that's a division code, 4,300.
What this is, Commissioners, this is the OpenGov program that we've been talking about for a while. Whoops, why is that doing that? This is our actual expenditures versus budget. I'm not sure that that came up as right down there. These are actual expenditures through budget for this fiscal year and last fiscal year. This column is the budget for last year. That's where the actual for last year, budget for this year, actual for this year, and this is year to date. So, and in this you can apply different filters. So if you wanted to see just this actually has revenue and expenditures in it, I believe. There, revenues versus expenditures for the year. And you can actually drill down into these things, but let me go back to just expenditures. This is organization-wide. If you wanted to see, for instance, just the water production division, you can clear all of those and look at, where's water production? Way down here. And that will update the expenditures for water production. And then for each of these lines, you can drill down into each of these lines to see what they are. And you can, the actual numbers are down at the bottom. So this would provide you a tool to look at where we actually, what we're budgeted and actually expended. And this is as of, these numbers are actually, should be as of December. Actually I started setting up a dashboard for the commissioners where and this goes to the KPIs that we were talking about before too. If they can be presented graphically, we can put them on here for you to see. That report I just showed you is the actual expenses for the previous month, the closed month. There is a report here is the, once it comes up, this is the year-to-date budget, and this is the year-to-date actual plus encumbrances. And as you scroll up and down these numbers, it gives comparative numbers on either side as to where we are, the budget numbers versus the actual year-to-date. And then within, this happens to be purchase services. If we go back.
John, for the,
But anyway, this gives you a flavor that you can go through and find a lot of this information and the actual numbers and variances down at the bottom. So this effectively could take the place of that 20-page document that's included in your packages. Is you can go in and look at the numbers individually here. And where
by the commissioners having access to this system.
yes. For instance, if you wanted to look just at, well, I just looked at the water production division. Whoops, take that out there. If you
I don't
wanted
think
to
they're
look
all
at-
gonna look at that.
Pardon?
I don't believe
I
they're
don't
all gonna
think
go
they-
in there and look at
They
it.
may not all look at this, no, and it does appear a little bit daunting at first to look at it, but the idea is to put up this number here, so, whoops. Get back there. So the, overall for the Joint Water Sewer Commission, this is where we should be, or budgeted for expenditures year to date. This is where we are year to date. So then you can go down through each of these, and if something is a big variance like this number right here, purchased equipment. Then you can drill down into each one of these and see the actual dollar amounts and the amount of variance per year, which this one is a 49% variance.
I think the Finance Committee would look at this
Yes, and
and drill in.
a couple of other things, just to show you what this is capable of, is this is the aged accounts receivable for each month for the last 12 months. And with the 120 days, the current amounts and each of the agings on that. So if you wanted to get an idea of how the 120-day old accounts are handled, that's the path for the last 12 months. Those balances have been.
Even in this bar chart, you can see that we've got a good trend.
Well, I was curious as why it had an uptick. I can't see the month. In December or October?
Yeah, the numbers are down here. Whoops. Come on. Well, I'm not sure why those are highlighted, but the values for each of those are listed down at the bottom of this. And I believe when you hover over that, it does give you the dollar value of that each month as well.
Yeah, but see, we had a good trend going, and then we had a rise, and it's starting to come down again. I'm just curious what caused the rise. Maybe there's, maybe it's an inane question.
I'm not certain. There could be several factors for that. The collection, it could have been a very large collection on an account that particular month. It could be a month where there were more write-off or more bad debts recorded than usual too, or more accounts turned over to collection. So,
but you're right, there is a positive trend.
and you can at least see the trend in this, and then bring that down to more specific questions. And then I do have one more in here I wanted to show you. Let's get back here. This, by the way, this is what LaDonna and I can see in this. When yours comes up, you would only see the commissioner dashboard, these 4 charts that are in here right now. The other one is the customer service call volume. For the blue is calls answered, that green calls abandoned, which means the caller hung up before it was answered, and then the calls forwarded, which are calls that come into customer service but are then forwarded on to other divisions. It was somebody that dialed the main number to talk to planning and construction or to purchasing or something. And that gives, so you can see gives you, there's not really too much of a pattern in that, but would identify any pattern of the, if there's a seasonal increase in calls.
John, for the commissioners' meeting, are these these 5 sheets, are they what you planning to give to them now? One is,
What we've actually cut it down to, commissioners, we have the balance sheet, the summary revenue expenditures. And then
is that the combined revenue statement?
yeah, the one-page revenue statement. We have the overtime report, the project report,
What was that one?
project report.
Project report, uh-huh.
And then there's one sheet that gives the current cash balances. And then the last one will be the 5 different investment accounts that we have.
What's the last one?
This
Investment plan
identifies
sheets.
the 5 different
This one?
investment accounts. Yes.
And we're not gonna give them the 20 pages of,
No, so we've been sending that out because in the Excel workbook is emailed to all of you before the week before the commission meeting. It's
This one, that's a supplemental schedule of cash balances. We have the notes in the middle. There are a number of notes down the middle. Can we pull those out and just have a schedule, you know, cash and cash equivalents, $1,818,633, note 1, and then we can go to the bottom, or maybe the next page with all the notes, and have the description elsewhere, so the numbers are just together with the line items. I think right now this is a good summary for them. A good summary for them. I'm wondering about, I was playing with this idea of having all the division codes, and then also a schedule, which is a snapshot, it's a summary, but not, I don't think they're gonna need that. But I'd like to see it, of the last 6 numbers of the GL code, the last 6 summarized, a summary, high level. Like if it's office supplies, 1 line for office supplies, not 1 line for office supplies for each of the divisions, just a total.
Yes, and that's the report that Donna has formatted. And again, we don't have that here for you today. This is really just this is the 4th, 5th working day that we've had this month. We were both at the leadership training for 2 days last week. So we've really only had 4 working days to get these together, which we normally have 7 or 8 before they're sent out to the commission. So these are still very much a draft. They haven't gone through a thorough review of them and editing of them. We printed these out for use by the committee this morning, but they probably will change and be updated before they're actually mailed out to the commission this week.
You know, Don, they may not need to see all the division detail. This may be enough right here.
Yeah,
Very high level. What are the totals?
The combined,
Yeah, the combined revenue statement.
yeah, it's a
That's
pretty
all
good
they need.
statement.
Yeah, I think so.
and then all you'd have to do is the categorical summaries. You still want the categoricals, or is that just for you guys?
That's just for us. Yeah, I think just for us, the total summary, if we were to look, I like this report right here that we got a copy of.
Yeah, that's the one where we got the variance reports, right? And it tells us where we've got hot spots.
Yeah, this was handed out to us at the retreat.
True, yeah.
I don't know exactly where it came from, but I like that. Not for the full commission, but for this committee.
Which report is that, Commissioner?
It says at the top,
It's basically a variance report, though, right?
it says consolidated line items detail.
It's called
That's the percentage.
Yeah, but I-
The color coded one.
Yeah, that's a special one where you went out to the side and did something.
And part of the reason that they introduced that is the superintendents don't have their notes due back until tomorrow to complete that, to get it reported. We're a little bit early in our reporting process there.
I think if the other commission members want to see this report, they can request it. I don't think they need to have that sent to them.
Again, it is sent to them in email before the meeting, so you do have the opportunity to see it there.
I mean, while we're on that, we can probably talk about this. This really has to do with budgeting, the budgeting process, and financial reports in general. You know, when I look down this line item detailed report, I think in terms, before I look at it, this is what I'm expecting to see. I think in terms of what are our products? You know, water, sewer. Well, water and sewer. That's where we get our money from, water and sewer. So everything's either water or sewer.
Well,
You
if
could have an
it's-
argument that maybe there's some overhead or,
Well, we've got a few stragglers. We rent out the antenna space but the core business is water and sewer.
right, there are some other income, you're right, location, line items. You basically have water and sewer, and you have, capital and expensed under water and sewer. And you have direct and indirect cost.
And we have reserve transfers, and we have debt service.
And you have debt service. That's a big column over here. That's debt service, and that's a completely different animal. We have debt service. And so when I look down this line item list and I see line items, these descriptors that are very similar to one another, one after the other. I mean, I'll see software in more than one place, computer in more than one place, computer supplies, general supplies, office supplies, all kinds of supplies. And they just seem to me like we have a lot of different pots to account for money, to report money. But what that turns in, that can be used as, from a management perspective, by the employees, is it gives them a place to spend money. The more of those line items you have, the more places they can spend money. That may be confused. We have maintenance, we have a lot of maintenance. Gosh, if we look down maintenance, we see, I mean, I'm thinking operations and maintenance are two of the categories underneath sewer and water. Operation and maintenance, fixed and expensed, indirect and direct.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah,
When we first started, this chart of accounts was established when we first started. And at that time, the division heads thought that they wanted all of that information. And much to, I tried to discourage that as much as possible because I've run into that in previous positions where the division head wanted all of these little fine line items.
Yeah.
On a separate line item, because he thought he needed that and would use that information. Once we set that up and he started using it, he goes, that's way too many line items, I don't know where.
right.
What are you thinking, John?
That was what was,
We've got a ton of those line items.
that's what division managers wanted at that time. Since that time, division managers have pretty much all had turnover in that, and the needs for their information have changed, but the legacy of those accounts is still remains in the accounting system, because you can't delete that. So in the budgeting process last year, we consolidated a number of reports last year, or a number of line items last year, and I think there are a number of line items that will disappear again this year. But because there's legacy information in there, they sometimes print out on these reports, even with zeros and everything.
Well, you run into a problem, and you can solve it depending on how you code stuff that's in the financial system. But sometimes you're asked, okay, well, what's the operating cost of Academy Creek? So you can't consolidate all sewer. You need to be able to do business cases analysis, and you need to have that data. And sometimes if you over-consolidate, then you lose visibility of that. But if you properly code the invoices you pay such that electronically that its information's in there, but the information that is shown to the manager, to the commission and things like that is at a higher level. But if you really, somebody says, I want to know how much it's costing to run Academy Creek, I want to know how much it's costing, could be lift station 4012.
Well, they should, the geo number should break down to accommodate that.
Medium between the two of you, where
Well, I agree, we don't need to see all of it, but we need to have it tagged in the data set such that a great deal of data can be pulled from the data set.
And one of the things too, I think, John, you were saying, even if we do consolidate some of these for budgeting purposes and managing, they're gonna show up, even if they've got a zero in them. We may not be using those.
I'm not suggesting, I said, if you keep track of the invoicing and properly code those things, you can do it. We don't necessarily need to see it that way. You just need to, you can pull the stuff, if I understand your coding correctly, where you just have supplies for the sewer division. Okay, you don't need to see all that other stuff, you just pull it by one of your, you know, if you stair step your coding system properly,
And each of the managers, you actually utilize that within the system. They go into their particular set of accounts, and they can see what their budget is and what they've expended, and then they click a little icon and go back and actually see every invoice all the way down through.
okay.
So they have
Let's take a 5-minute biology break. And,
I'm gonna wait for that.
yeah, we'll come back and see if we can wrap this up.
Okay.
Thank you. I was about to buy something.
Mark my word.
Cost accounting basis, we want to know what it costs to provide a particular good or service. So if you tell me you want to know how much it takes to provide sewer collection and treatment, maybe a little bit hard, a little bit iffy-ish to divide it out specifically to one or the other of those. But if you want to know wastewater services, which is the way it shows up on their bill, we can provide the costs from all sources that go into that.
We can provide cost as far as total cost, but we can't,
Yeah.
what is most difficult to provide is what Commissioner Copeland's asking for, is how much, there are different components of the cost of that unit. There's direct labor, there's direct materials, there's allocation costs, there's factory overhead, so he wants to see.
Yeah, that'd be the only thing. The overhead part would be hard to divide up, because then you gotta make some assumptions about how to divide up the bodies in this room.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Some of those pieces
Well,
airspace
but
and the power bill.
what you can't tell me, and I don't know whether we want to ever go this way, is how much, what are the expenses for the collection system on St. Simon's Island versus the expenses for North Mainland collection system?
We can't today. However, as Steve will tell you, I gave him a rather lengthy explanation of our asset management program, and when we're fully implemented on that, they ought to be able to go in and pull up the assets related for a given year, pull up the expenses and work orders for a given year in a given area,
Okay.
and you ought to be able to pick up the labor, materials, parts, permits, any of that stuff.
That's coming out of our accounting system, correct?
Well,
Based
it'll
on
be
the
in the
invoice
asset
lists?
management. I don't know.
Oh, that's gonna be in CityWorks.
City Works.
Is that a
No, it's not
module,
in here.
asset management module within CityWorks? Is that the term that you're
No,
using, or
City Works in total, computer maintenance management systems.
CMMS?
CMMS is what City Works is.
Oh.
It's got modules for, operational areas, it's got modules for inventory, it's got, if you're running, public works, it'll, streets and roads and signs and signals. There's different modules for different things that you can do. But for us, for the water and for the sewer, it's got all the pieces there. We currently have the pieces to, within a work order, track all the labor charges, all the equipment uses, whether it's trucks, front-end loaders, whatever, track all the parts and materials. We're out there replacing a length of pipe, and there's gaskets or super glue to hold it together. Whatever those things are, probably the only thing that's not directly called out in that report might be incidental charges like fuel or maintenance related to maintaining some of those equipment items that go into being able to do that maintenance. So there's a little bit that gets away from you, but I would say 90+% of the charges that go on it, if we're doing our job right out in the field with the work orders in our CMMS, I ought to be able to tell you, for all the assets on all the sewer assets on St. Simon's Island, here's what it costs us to manage and maintain those assets during the year.
So
If CityWorks and the management systems were fully integrated, then we would be able to not only find how much it costs, but how much the variances are between what the actual labor rates were versus the standard labor rates that we applied to those personnel, how much our total vehicle cost was versus the standard cost per hour, per mile of vehicles, and be able to do all of that type of analysis to fully actually calculate that.
Yeah. Well, we've got some work to do on the asset management side before we can integrate the two together,
Okay,
but we're working on that.
we ready to go on to something else?
Yeah. That, what I heard you saying about CityWorks is that, you mixed some terms for me at the end. In the beginning, I was hearing about reporting, what you were talking about, and then you mentioned managing the asset.
Well, the reports that I thought I heard, what the question was is, can we get the costs specific to St. Simon's Island
Right.
for sewer work, maintenance. So what I was doing is wrapping that up, whatever it costs in terms of personnel to, and when I say manage, go out there and do whatever it takes to do. Not necessarily somebody sitting in my office, you know.
Right.
That doesn't get broken down and pushed into it. But as far as all the actual hands-on resources, that gets captured into the work orders, or it will be in a more, we were talking the other day about getting the domain rebuilt and getting the right sets of field data, data fields, and then the right sets of pick lists for each one depending on the needs that our people have or issues. Once all that's done, we should be able to give very, very detailed reports to filter for any kind of information you want about the assets that we have and the maintenance we do on them.
Right. Get reports about the assets that we have and the maintenance that we do on them, and it's a reporting kind of thing. And what I'm hoping to see us move more towards in the future, which maybe is where we have been in the past, but maybe it didn't work so well, is that we can be in a situation where we can actually manage that asset, manage that piece of equipment, plan the maintenance out.
Yes.
Plan the maintenance, plan the preventative maintenance,
That's another aspect of the software.
and actually get the equipment, every piece of equipment, ultimately in the system. I don't know how many years it's going to take, but it'd be nice if it all could be done in 1 year. Every major piece of equipment is touched, and
Or could
we
be
know the
touched.
maintenance it needs to have, and we perform that maintenance, and we have brought that piece of equipment up to its nameplate operating capability, or its operating nameplate. Its capability may be below nameplate right now, or it may be, I mean, it may be in a situation, we could look at predictive maintenance as well, because that piece of equipment may be nearing the end of its life. And we need to know that so that we can plan and make the system robust.
You nail, all that is to be accomplished with what we're doing with the, right now, as we talked about the other day, we're starting with the critical equipment first. Because we've got literally just under 100,000. If you want to count every pipe, every valve, every pump, every, motor, every whatever, probably got close to 100,000 pieces collectively in the utility. Certainly one of the things we've addressed is it is going to take forever. It's going to take a long time. Immediately put the priority to get all the critical stuff, particularly the process things in the plants, the lift stations, the water production facilities, the tanks. Let's get all those equipment items, critical items in, and they're making the calls right now to the vendors when they can find them if they still exist, getting the manuals and the preventive maintenance task descriptions. As we collect all that up, we're going to be loading it into the system to do exactly what you're saying. Get on top of the preventive maintenance, and at some point get to the point where we are, as you say, functioning at the level that piece of equipment was designed to operate at. And at that point, once we're doing the preventative maintenance, hopefully the maintenance patterns we see will be indicative of what that actual piece of equipment is supposed to. Right now, it's so reactive. We've done so little in the way of PMs on a lot of our equipment. That report you guys got on that Fenton dryer, what'd that tell you?
You told us if everything's in that condition, we've got some
You
issues.
got a mess. That's exactly right.
Well, I mean, even without that report,
Well, you can
without
say
the
so.
report, if you just said, how many maintenance people do we have for 3 wastewater treatment plants? I asked that one question one day, and the answer was 5. It was 4 or 5. I think it's 5. And when you think about 5 maintenance people for 350 million gallons average a month treatment,
In
5 people.
3 locations.
split between 3 locations, how can you run a business like that and be robust?
Can't.
There's just not enough, so I start looking, well, what about outside services? Who's taking care of these assets
We
for
do have
us?
outside services.
And I'm trying to identify how many, how much help we've got,
Yeah.
but we need enough. We need to know
Well,
that we don't have enough, and we need to know how much enough is so that we can get this done as fast as possible. I mean, some of the words I hear are, when this
Well,
happens and as this happens and all that. Well, I don't want to wait 10 years to get it done. I mean, I
It's
want to
probably
know
gonna be a
what we do
while.
it now. If we get it done this year, what we got to do.
I don't, I don't think it's a manpower thing. It gets into a cultural shift.
there's manpower issues too.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is, it's not just that, it's a cultural issue of getting people used to functioning this way. We tackled changing to a, SAP system is what I call it, but an enterprise system. It took us almost 4 years to go from start to when it finally was fully implemented. And people were working very hard, and we spent a lot of money trying to do it. We made some mistakes, had to back around, but we finally got it all straightened out. Your expectation here is fine, as long as you understand that it may not be achieved.
And it could be now,
There are a lot of things to be done, plus we gotta run a utility. Culturally, plus it may not be the most important thing on the day that it needs to be done, because something else comes up that you gotta do to keep the system functioning.
Well, the most important thing is delivering the products.
That's
the
correct.
first thing.
That's correct.
And then next, we need to be making sure that we can continue to deliver products.
Right.
and we're basically doing that right now. The goal is to be able to do it more reliably and use less resources. We're working into the things that, as I think I told you guys before, a lot of the things that a more mature utility would take for granted in terms of foundational building blocks and philosophies of how to, maintain and whatnot, we're still trying to grow the troops up on it. We've got to get them the tools set up. Ideally, all the things we're doing right now should have been done 20, 30 years ago when the plants and the facilities were installed.
Excuse me for a minute. Do y'all mind stepping out, everybody, and turning off the system?
Just for a minute.
We'll call you back in.
Whichever commission meeting we present the financials at for the month. If we assume that every month there's going to be some kind of reporting to the full commission on financials, then 2 weeks prior to that, we can have our meeting. And that gives us 2 weeks to think about everything and get everything in order. If there's a recommendation to be made for an approval, then we can do it for that meeting, or whatever needs to be done. Always 2 weeks before.
You run into
That's what I'd like to do.
You run into the problem, I don't know how much work it is now, with the end of the month, financial information being consolidated and worked. And the reason why this was set up such that the finance committee occurred in the 3rd week of the month before the final commission meeting of the month was to allow the time to close the month, do all the adjustments that they have to do, and then produce the reports. are we to the point now where the data feed is such that the reports can be pretty much generated just like that?
It depends on how you define just like that. The
3
report-
days?
I would say more 5.
So what you're saying is that,
We can-
that
we can-
the first full week of a month, you need to have, to get the data correct. So technically, we could do the finance committee meeting in the same week that we have our first commission meeting. And then we would present the finance information at the,
Third week, at the third week, in the
No,
second,
it'd
at
be
the
the
second meeting.
at the second meeting, yes.
So we'd have finance the first week, and we would have, present the financials to the commission the third week.
But you wouldn't have time. If
No.
the finance committee meeting is the first week, that's what they were saying.
Yeah, he needs the first week to get his stuff together.
You want this-
What happens now is we have the first commission meeting on the first Thursday, then the next Thursday, in between the first and the third, the second Thursday is when we have the statements of commission. That's been our typical calendar.
Yeah, the commission meetings, to meet your need, you need 5 days after the first day of the month in order to have the reports together. So to meet your need, the commission meetings should really be in the second and the fourth instead of the first and the third.
That would be probably better. You know, the other benefit, if we did that, we wouldn't line up with the county commission meeting, and it might help Wayne out a little bit. Because we have, on occasion, had to have Mike Browning would leave early because he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to go.
So our bylaws, I guess, dictate when the meetings have to occur, first and third? Is there any
I don't think
requirement?
there's anything,
The bylaws do state that the commission meetings are supposed to be held the first and third Thursdays of the month at this address at 2:00 PM. However, Charlie and I are going back and forth right now, not back and forth between us, but, talking back and forth as to how binding are the bylaws.
Who set the bylaws?
How do the bylaws get changed?
uh,
Is that by a commission vote, or is
If it
that
was, that
by
means
a
you guys could
legislative?
John, can you answer for that historically? How have they been changed?
I don't know. It's-
I don't recall anything in the enabling legislation or the operational agreement that references.
No, those are the only outside documents. Everything else is an internal document.
Which by default would make that a BGJWSC document.
So we could update, if that's the case, the commission could amend the
Changes.
bylaws.
That's correct. I would go into it with Charlie and tell him that's what we're gonna do.
I'm just going from my recollection right now.
Yeah, well, it's always been on,
Sometimes it's faulty.
it's always been on Thursday of the first, and that's what it was when I came on. So I'm sure that those 5 commissioners,
call Charlie.
I don't think we need to do it now.
Yeah,
I can email out to them asking them, how binding is that? What is the purpose of this
Yeah.
meeting and direction we're
The
going?
commission, you said there's discussion to
There's
change how
discussion.
the meeting's on it?
Yeah, at the
we need
commission
to-
level, we gotta get that sorted out first.
Yeah, and then we'll sort out what we're gonna do.
My comment was only geared towards making sure that when the scheduling is done, that we have adequate time to get the financial statements prepared for the meeting. It takes a little bit.
So 5 business days.
Can I bargain for more?
No,
Now, what about Mark Rouse getting do you need his information for this? Don't you need that?
Are there any more items we need to talk about then? That answer's gonna come after the commission has discussion about the full commission calendar.
Did you adjourn us yet?
I was going to if we're all,
Well-
any more discussion?
More discussion.
Agenda item number 7A, and then we just talked about 9, so 7A,
We've talked about A,
that was combined with
that was combined with,
6.
yeah, 6.
Defer number 10, defer number
Well,
7.
No, 10, that discussion, take that off. Because he and I discussed it. There's no more to discuss, and Tripp is not here because we were going to discuss it with him, but,
Oh, by the way,
He sent, by the way, Tripp sent me a note that said
yeah.
he got called into some sort of emergency at the hospital and had to leave.
I was gonna say, in regards to the tap fees, I've got that growth chart that the comprehensive plan from the county did. We had a meeting yesterday, just FYI. I've got a little better picture of where they think things are going, which will reduce the basis for the tap fee, or could,
Will reduce the expansion requirements.
I think.
That's the starting point.
Well, as long, I don't care where the tap fees go, per se, as long as we have enough to meet what the predicted expansion requirements are. And it's all based on numbers and not somebody going, well, I think we ought to cut them in half.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to see a basis for the numbers. So, a quick summary on budget preparation status, then we'll be done?
Senior staff's reviewing the division budgets, and we're gonna try to meet next week, if we can get our reviews with, our immediate staff, so that we can then get together to provide you guys with a, recommended budget shortly thereafter. And remember, the considerations that we raised in our discussion previous was, we believe that without raising rates, we are incurring enough revenue right now to deal with some small changes, some of the things that we just talked about, to provide some needed resources in asset management. I hadn't talked about the maintenance manager yet, but, you know, that might be an additional piece. But the asset management, manager, for certain, is one that we were gonna be struggling to find a way to fund it and meet the zero expenditure increase. But we don't have to worry about that again, because the revenues, as per the report today, we're on the good path through the end of the year to exceed, and nothing unusual is going on in the environment to cause revenues to go, except for that $482,000, which even with that involved, we're still gonna be 1.2 above on our revenues versus our expenses at the end of the year, if nothing else changes the rest of the year.
You have extra slots,
That may-
unused employee slots that have never been filled, and we're doing fine without them, and those could be used from a head count basis to take care of these other needs that we're talking about.
So,
And some dollars associated with those, but they're probably lower dollars than what we would
Much
need
lower.
overall. But we have other places where we have savings of some sort that could help fund it.
we'll work all that into it.
And the asset manager and the maintenance manager that I've mentioned, my ideal on a maintenance manager, they could be the same guy, the same person. A maintenance manager could come in and load up the CMMS, and in doing so, learn the whole system and kill two birds with one stone.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
I could see the logic in what you're saying. I'm not convinced that the hours in the day are there to handle both, but there may be. When I say a maintenance manager, one of the other things we gotta be very careful of is we get all this equipment and then we start doing scheduling. You know, it's one thing to plan the job, say we need to do these next 5, but scheduling and making sure there's no obstacles Now, who's gonna chase all those details down?
Well, what is the maintenance manager gonna do?
Ensure-
Because essentially, water distribution, the maintenance manager there basically is the superintendent, and Kurt in systems pumping and maintenance is the maintenance manager
Let me-
there.
Let me,
But what is the other function he's gonna do?
my thinking is that we're talking about more like a process maintenance manager. The guys that fix the pipes and leaks, that's not the same kind of maintenance as fixing pumps, rotating equipment, and the electrical instrumentation type things that go on in, you know,
So
pump
he's
stations
gonna,
and treatment plants and
Okay.
water production wells.
okay, so when we have a pump that goes down,
Right.
we don't have the capability in-house to fix it.
Maybe for the smaller ones, that we have at least one guy who is extremely skilled in that regard, but I wouldn't put him on a big pump because the liabilities and issues and the,
We wanna get out of the mode of pumps going down.
yeah.
We wanna fix the pump before
Yeah.
before it breaks.
That's correct.
We wanna do planned maintenance and preventative maintenance, and the maintenance manager is gonna do that. He's not gonna do it, he's not gonna do it himself, but he's gonna manage that process, get it all together, figure out what needs to be maintained in the system, how it needs to be maintained, how many people it takes to do that, and get it scheduled.
Well, that's
There-
where I
there's-
agree with you on the asset manager could be dual-hatted that way because he's running a process and not actually managing. But I expect Kurt to do his job and schedule and do the PMs. I expect the Mark Riles to do his job and schedule and do all the PMs. But I
Or
expect.
see to it that it's.
Yeah, and the same with Derek.
It could
And
be,
the same with
it's
that.
two ways of skinning the same.
Yeah, but there needs to be somebody that says, these are the PMs that need to be done, and he's managing the process. I agree with that. And I don't understand where you're saying exactly that they can't be, that you need a separate one, because I don't understand
Well-
how their functions aren't gonna clash.
I hadn't thought about using, Mark and Kurt. I know Kurt's got a lot on his plate. Mark may have ample room to pick that chore up. I just see that from a big perspective, understanding maintenance, and not all of our superintendents are as clear on process management type issues as I'm thinking you guys are. But it may be that we need somebody just a little more astute in those areas to be able to understand what we're doing and push out the preventive maintenance in the way they need to without somebody standing over them to say, okay, did you do your job today? Did you, what are the PMs for this next week, for this next month, for the next 6 months? Do we have the materials and parts ready to go to do those jobs? Have we scheduled them in the sequence that we need to?
That's what we have Andrew doing right now. I understand he's overloaded, but that's what he's trying to do.
He is not doing that because we're still to the point where we don't have the PMs loaded into the system.
Yeah.
There's no way for them, anyone to do that yet. But if we had some extra resources to help that function along, someone a little more knowledgeable that knew how to chase down those manuals with the PMs and the other operating information that they need to get themselves set up into a place, and even just putting transferring that information into the CMMS for its use, and have preventive work orders sitting out there staged and waiting. You need somebody that's got a little bit on the ball to do it.
Needs to have a maintenance mind.
Yeah.
Needs to
I don't
understand the
disagree with that.
process of maintenance to
Why don't-
load it up properly.
Why don't you sit down and write out job descriptions?
I'm working on the asset management guy right now. I
Yeah,
haven't-
just handwrite it and,
Well, I was thinking they were the same person.
It could be, but I'm gonna reserve judgment on that till I talk it around a
Because
little bit.
once the maintenance management system gets initially loaded properly, then that job gets minimized. There'll still be some upkeep on it, but it won't be a full-time kind of an application.
Okay,
But that person could be, you might call them a maintenance scheduler. And let
I
them
don't wanna-
also
I
be
don't-
the asset
we
manager.
need a high-level person. If I'm telling the others I'm hiring a scheduler, they're gonna look for me to hire a 14-hour, $1 an hour
I think you
individual.
need either an electrical or mechanical engineer, one or the other.
Mechanical.
That's what I would pick.
All right, all right.
I think
I got the
we
margin.
understand, you and I recognize requirements to get asset management fully implemented and doing all those things where, you know, the machine needs to have something changed before the machine tells you by breaking down.
Yep, we need that. And I don't think we have that concept. I just don't have, we think we have that appreciation right now in our system.
That's, yeah.
Or at the lower, where the rubber meets the road.
I hope the commissioners understand that we don't have that need met, but
There's,
maybe they don't.
I think some of the
not if
commissioners
some
have
of 'em
run it till it breaks.
We don't wanna do that.
That's my fear.
We want everything up and running.
I have
Okay.
one other question.
Sure.
For the commission meeting next week, you want the abbreviated statements for that?
That's all I
five-
want.
And,
There were 6 pages, I think, that you had put together. Is that what you're asking?
yes, and do you want a similar type of presentation that you've had before, or do you want the committee to bring that forward to the commission?
Well, we've got Ben and I are talking about that. He wants me to make the finance presentation. That's what he's saying.
That's what I was wondering is.
And I'm, if I were to give the finance presentation, I would probably tell him, this is how much money we had come in this month, this is how much we spent, and this is the way it looks for the end of the year. Do you have any questions? And that would probably be about it. Now, if we do that, then we'll need you in the room to fill their questions, because they may ask some questions. The questions are often associated with how much information we give them to begin with to look at. And they need to see in advance, they need to see these reports in advance and decide what they want to know about them. I think this has been a good summary meeting for us. I mean, we've got some things to
Work on.
simplify. I'm trying to simplify. So that's it. Oh, with your budgeting, you're putting together some goals are you putting goals together to
Yeah,
align with the budget in some way?
well, goals we talked about the other day,
That big long list of them.
some of those align, that long list aligns with them. But I also was trying to work out the goal program that you and I briefly managed.
These are mostly strategies to me.
Yeah.
These are tactics. This is how we're going to accomplish having a robust system. No further business coming before the committee.